Outcome over empathy. There's a crossroads most of us reach, quietly, many times in our lives. Maybe it's at work, in the middle of a crisis. Maybe it's at home, with someone you love. It's the moment when empathy collides with the results, and you're forced to choose what matters more, the person in front of you or the outcome you need. For some, the decision feels easy. But for others, for the ones who are wired to get things done, to solve, to win, the choice becomes a kind of reflex. Feelings are weighed, measured, and then, if they're inconvenient, pushed aside. Because the world, or at least the part of it that's always pressing against you, rewards results, not emotions. This is outcome over empathy. Picture this. You're leading a team. The deadline is brutal. Everyone is exhausted, tension thrumming through the air like static before a storm. Someone comes to you, eyes hollow, voice trembling, needing a break, needing to be heard. In another world, maybe you'd listen. Maybe you'd sit them down, unravel the knot of worry behind their words, offer comfort. But the clock's ticking. The project is all that matters. You push their concern aside. You tell them to keep going, promising you'll talk later. The result? The deadline is met. The boss is happy. The company moves forward. But something in the process gets lost. It starts as a whisper. Guilt. Maybe regret. But you remind yourself. This is what leadership looks like, right? Results, not excuses. You didn't make the world this way. You're just surviving in it. This mindset is everywhere, in high-pressure jobs, in competitive schools, even in families. Think of the surgeon in the operating room, hands steady as a metronome while chaos unfolds around them. They can't afford to feel, not in the moment. The cost of empathy, the weight of someone else's pain, would paralyze their skill. So, they compartmentalize. They become the scalpel, efficient, cold, effective. Or, imagine the startup founder burning through their 20s, sacrificing weekends, relationships, health. Every conversation with friends becomes a transaction. If it doesn't move the mission forward, it's set aside. Empathy shrinks, becomes a distraction, a luxury for people who aren't building something that might change the world. When the company finally succeeds, everyone praises the grit. But no one sees the lonely nights, the friendships that died quietly, unremarked. And sometimes, this isn't about careers or grand ambitions. Sometimes, it's much smaller. You see it in the parent who silences a child's tears because there's no time for softness before school. You see it in the partner who turns every argument into a solution to be optimized instead of a feeling to be felt. Over time, relationships start to feel like checklists. Connection is measured in milestones achieved, problems solved, boxes ticked. There's a reason for this. The world does not slow down for your pain. Deadlines don't care about your feelings. Bills, responsibilities, expectations, they all demand answers, not empathy. And so, slowly, maybe without even realizing, you adapt. You tell yourself the story that you'll feel later, after the work is done, that you'll comfort yourself or someone else after the storm passes. But here's the trap. The work is never done. There's always another crisis, another finish line. So the feelings don't just wait. They fade, suppressed, smothered, replaced by adrenaline and focus. You become the kind of person who runs toward the fire, not away from it. The hero, the fixer, the one people rely on when the stakes are high. And at first, people love you for it. You're the dependable one, the strong one, the person who never crumbles. You carry the weight others can't. But quietly, there's a cost. The more you silence your own empathy, the harder it becomes to access. You start seeing the world in terms of input and output, costs and benefits, winners and losers. The warmth drains out of your voice, replaced by a transactional edge. Let's look at the science for a moment. Studies in psychology have shown that chronic suppression of emotion, especially for the sake of performance, rewires your brain's emotional pathways. It numbs not just negative feelings, but joy, wonder, love. The regions that handle empathy can atrophy from lack of use, like muscles that haven't moved in years. You become efficient. You become formidable. But you also become brittle, even to yourself. People around you notice, even if you don't. A friend stops calling because you always turn their pain into a problem to solve. A partner feels alone, even when you're sitting right beside them. A child learns not to cry because it makes you uncomfortable. The world gets quieter, less vivid, as the feedback loop of human connection begins to fade. But here's the dark irony. Outcome over empathy works. In the short term, it works incredibly well. The deal closes, the surgery succeeds, the crisis is managed, and each time the reward is tangible. Money, praise, survival. It's easy to believe that this is the right way to live. Until, one day, you wake up and realize you don't recognize the person in the mirror. The armor you built to protect yourself from feelings has become a prison, keeping you from the world and from yourself. There are stories everywhere. The coach who drove their team to victory by crushing all softness, only to burn out in silence. The CEO who scaled a company to greatness, but can't remember the last time they laughed for real. The parent who built a life of safety for their family, only to find themselves estranged from the very people they sacrificed for. These are not rare, these are everywhere. Sometimes the shift back comes suddenly. A health scare, a loss, a moment of weakness cracks the shell. Feelings flood back, overwhelming, unfamiliar. You realize you've been running from yourself for years. The very skills that made you strong now make you lonely. The world, it turns out, doesn't need heroes who never feel. It needs people who know how to hold both, the outcome and the empathy. So, what does it look like to live differently? It's not as easy as just feeling more. The world still rewards results. But maybe, just maybe, there's another way. Maybe it's about building a pause into the reflex. The extra moment before you suppress, the question you ask before you move on. How are you, really? Not just to others, but to yourself. Maybe it's about finding small pockets of softness, even in the chaos. Letting yourself be human, even when it feels inefficient. The most powerful people in history, leaders, healers, creators, are not the ones who shut off their feelings, but the ones who learn to carry them, to use empathy as a guide, not an anchor. The truth is, every outcome has a hidden cost. Sometimes, the price is paid in feelings that never had the space to exist. Sometimes, the price is paid in relationships that fade quietly into memory. The world won't stop to grieve those losses, but you can. You can choose, even in the smallest ways, to let empathy have a voice, even if it's just a whisper. So the next time you're at that crossroads, ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be remembered as? The one who always delivered, no matter the cost, or the one who left room for humanity, even in the pursuit of greatness? The choice isn't always obvious. The world will keep pushing for results, but somewhere, beneath the noise of deadlines and demands, your own voice is waiting to be heard. Don't let the outcome be the only thing that matters, because when the dust settles and the world gets quiet, it's empathy, not efficiency, that reminds you you're alive. And maybe, just maybe, that's the outcome worth fighting for. Math of regret, avoidance, you lose something, money, a relationship, a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and for a moment, the old human instincts want to take over. You want to feel it, mourn it, let the regret wash over you until it hollows you out. But you don't. You refuse to let yourself cry over loss, because somewhere along the way, you learned that pain isn't just a wound. It's a problem that demands to be solved. So, instead of collapsing, you start to run the numbers. Regret becomes data. Sadness becomes a formula you can break down, piece by piece, until you convince yourself you'll never feel this helpless again. You remember the sting of losing a job. Maybe you weren't even surprised. Maybe you saw it coming. The last one in, first one out. Your mind replays the scene in slow motion, over and over, but you don't let the emotional avalanche bury you. Instead, you open a spreadsheet or a notepad or just the whiteboard in your mind. You start listing variables. Did you take too many risks? Did you miss warning signs? What percentage of people in your field were laid off this quarter? Was it random, or were there clues you missed? Now, pain becomes probability. You analyze the industry, the managers, the economy, until the sense of personal failure is diluted. Almost mathematical. Almost not personal anymore. Every what if becomes a branch in a decision tree. Every regret gets its own probability weight. You're not just feeling, you're running regression analysis on your own mistakes, looking for the coefficient that explains your loss. The more you can reduce it to numbers, the less it feels like it happened to you. More like you were a variable in someone else's equation. This isn't just an escape, it's a defense mechanism, a form of intellectual anesthesia. You convince yourself that if you can predict the next disaster, you can avoid the next regret. The pain isn't gone, but it's numbed into a manageable quantity, like the painkiller that doesn't heal the wound but dulls the ache so you can keep moving. Some people call this cold or robotic, but the truth is, it's a kind of survival, because feeling the full weight of regret, unfiltered, can be paralyzing. It can pin you to the floor, replaying every word, every choice, every silent second when you could have changed your fate. And so, you turn to the only thing that feels solid: numbers. Think about relationships. Maybe you trusted someone who left. Maybe you gave your all to someone who only took. The heartbreak is overwhelming, but what if you could break it down, like a statistician dissecting a failed experiment? You replay your memories not for nostalgia, but for data collection. How many red flags did you ignore? How many times did you silence your own doubts? What is the recurrence rate for betrayal in your past relationships? You track patterns in their behavior. How often did they cancel plans, dodge questions, go silent for days? Now you have a model. You're not heartbroken. You're a researcher trying to publish a paper on the predictive factors of emotional loss. You notice the same pattern everywhere. The pain of financial loss becomes an analysis of risk exposure. The regret of missing a major opportunity becomes a mental flowchart. What were the odds it would come around again? Should you have acted, or were the conditions stacked against you from the start? The randomness of life turns into a series of coin flips, dice rolls, and random walks. You run Monte Carlo simulations in your mind. If you repeated this day 1,000 times, how many times would you end up with the same regret? You know, deep down, that no amount of analysis can erase the sting. But the math is a shield. It allows you to keep moving, to keep acting, to keep risking, even when the memory of failure wants to freeze you in place. But there's a cost to living this way. When you reduce regret to numbers, you start to lose touch with the reality of emotion. You become more observer than participant. Friends notice you don't really react anymore. You don't panic when things go wrong, but you also don't celebrate when things go right. Happiness becomes another spike in a graph, a deviation from the mean, something to be smoothed out over time. Your defense against regret is so effective that it starts to numb everything else too. Life becomes safer, but it also becomes thinner, less vivid. The color drains out, replaced by grayscale analysis. You catch yourself looking for patterns in places where there aren't any. If you lost a loved one to illness, you become hypervigilant about health, analyzing every cough or ache, reading medical studies at midnight, running risk assessments on yourself and everyone you care about. If a business failed, you dissect every decision, every partnership, every market trend. You build a fortress of probability, hoping it will keep regret at bay, but the fortress has no windows. You're safe from surprise, but also cut off from possibility. Yet, even as you double down on this way of thinking, the universe throws you curveballs. Randomness asserts itself. The improbable happens, not just once, but over and over. You realize that no amount of analysis can prepare you for everything. You can reduce your odds of regret, but never eliminate it. There will always be variables you didn't see, correlations you misunderstood, events that blindside you from directions you didn't even know existed. The math is never complete. The model is never finished. And so, a new kind of regret emerges. The regret of living too cautiously, of measuring so carefully that you stopped truly living. You become aware of a new pain. Not the pain of making a mistake, but the pain of never allowing yourself to make any at all. But the deeper truth is, regret isn't just an error to be avoided. It's proof that you risked something, that you cared enough to be vulnerable. It's the shadow cast by love, ambition, hope. The more you care, the more you risk regret. And yet, the more you try to avoid regret, the smaller your world becomes. You can choose safety, but you lose the chance for transformation, for growth, for the kind of happiness that can only be found on the other side of risk. The math of regret avoidance is seductive. It promises control, but it delivers confinement. It can keep you from making the same mistake twice, but it can also keep you from making any leap at all. Real wisdom lies somewhere in the middle, learning from your pain, but not letting it become a cage. Using the numbers to inform, not imprison. Allowing yourself to feel, even when it hurts, because that's what makes you alive. not just a well-programmed algorithm running loss minimization routines. So, the next time you feel regret closing in, when your mind wants to convert pain into probability, pause. Let yourself feel it, just for a moment. Acknowledge the loss, the longing, the fear of repeating it. Then use your math. Analyze, adjust, plan, but don't forget to return to the world of color, risk, and feeling. Because at the end of all the calculations, you are not just a variable, you are the one writing the equation. And sometimes, the only way to solve for regret is to let yourself live fully enough to risk feeling it all again. This is how regret becomes not your enemy, but your compass. Not a statistic to be minimized, but a signpost showing you where your heart once lived and might live again, if you dare to trust the odds and step forward anyway. Cost-benefit grief filter. Imagine standing at the edge of a familiar silence, the kind that follows a loss you haven't allowed yourself to feel. You miss them. Of course you do. Their absence echoes in the small details: an empty chair, a song on the radio, the quiet at dinner, the way their laugh filled a room. But even as that ache begins to rise, something inside you throws up a wall. It's not denial. It's not forgetting. It's something colder, more rational, and much harder to notice. It's the invisible calculus running quietly in the background of your mind. A cost-benefit grief filter that asks, is it worth it to break down? Is it worth the consequences, the lost productivity, the vulnerability, the mess that comes when grief is allowed to take the wheel? You stand there, caught between the truth that you care and the reality that mourning, at least in its raw, uncontrolled form, is a luxury you can't or won't afford. And so you don't. You hold it together, not because you don't feel, but because the hidden math says the cost of collapsing outweighs whatever benefit comes from surrendering to the pain. This is not about apathy. This is not about being heartless or cold or incapable of love. It's about survival in a world that demands you keep moving, in workplaces where deadlines don't wait for your heartbreak, in families that depend on you to be the strong one, in social circles where vulnerability is quietly judged and public displays of emotion make others uncomfortable. You tell yourself you will grieve later, when it's safe, when it's private, when you have the bandwidth to fall apart. But that day never quite arrives. The world keeps spinning, responsibilities pile up, and every time the sadness tries to break through, you do the mental math and decide, again, not today. Think about how we talk about grief. We love the idea of catharsis. We celebrate the breakdowns in movies. The protagonist sobbing in the rain, the shattered glasses, the cathartic scream. But in reality, grief is often managed like a budget. Every tear is a withdrawal. Every day off is a cost. Every public crack in your composure is a potential liability. If you're a parent, you worry about how your sorrow will affect your children. If you're a leader, you fear it will erode your credibility. If you're a caretaker, you know you're not allowed to break because someone else's survival depends on your stability. There are cultures, workplaces, and even families where grief is seen as weakness or even failure. Maybe you were raised hearing, be strong, don't cry, move on. Maybe you watched adults in your life push through tragedy with stoic faces, returning to work the next morning, never mentioning what hurt them. Maybe you learned to perform the ritual, send the flowers, say the right words, attend the memorial, but never let yourself fall apart. The script is always the same. Acknowledge, nod, move forward. The grief never gets permission to spill out. So it is filtered, processed, hidden behind an invisible glass. You tell yourself this is maturity. You tell yourself this is strength. But what is really happening is an ongoing risk analysis, a perpetual balancing act between honoring your feelings and protecting your stability. Let's make this painfully real. Imagine you're in the middle of an intense work project when the news arrives. A close friend or family member is gone. Your phone buzzes, your world stutters. The first wave of shock hits you, but immediately your whole brain does the numbers. Can I afford to leave? What will happen to my team if I'm not here? Will this ruin the deadlines I've been killing myself to meet? You swallow the tears and keep typing. You answer your boss's call with a voice just steady enough to pass as normal. You tell yourself you'll process it after work, but when you get home, you're so exhausted that you scroll through social media or binge watch a show instead. Anything to avoid opening the door to the flood. The pain gets triaged, set aside in favor of survival. Or maybe you're the one who everyone else depends on. You're the parent, the caretaker, the one who pays the bills, organizes the meals, solves the problems. If you break, the whole house collapses. So you don't. You walk past their empty room, their favorite chair, their scent on a jacket left behind, and instead of letting yourself crumble, you force yourself into the next task. Laundry, dishes, homework, anything but standing still. Your own pain is filtered, diluted, managed like a dangerous chemical. You ration your feelings, just enough to acknowledge the loss, never enough to lose control. Sometimes the grief filter is so subtle, you don't realize you're doing it. You find yourself saying, "I'm fine, it's sad, but I have to move on. They wouldn't want me to fall apart." You take on new projects, distract yourself with errands, fill the silence with noise and activity. People praise you for being so strong. They marvel at your composure. You accept the compliments, even as something inside you feels hollow. The cost-benefit grief filter is working overtime, shielding you from the chaos, but also cutting you off from the rawness that reminds you you're alive. And yet, every filter comes at a cost of its own. What you don't feel doesn't just disappear, it leaks out in other ways. Maybe you find yourself snapping at loved ones over trivial things. Maybe you develop chronic headaches or insomnia. Maybe you feel numb, disconnected, as if your own life is happening behind a pane of glass. The sadness you postponed becomes a kind of static, buzzing quietly in the background, never loud enough to drown you, but never gone. Your body remembers what your mind refuses to process. The benefit of not breaking down is always temporary. This isn't about judgment. The cost-benefit grief filter is a survival strategy. It's the adaptation of people who know what it means to have too much at stake to let themselves fall apart. It's what happens when the world tells you that productivity is worth more than pain, that strength is measured by how well you suppress your needs. It's how you keep going when giving in would mean risking everything you've built. But consider for a moment what you lose by running this filter for too long. Grief, as terrible as it feels, is also a bridge, connecting us to our memories, to our deepest feelings, to the humanity we share with everyone who has ever lost someone. When you refuse to mourn, you deny yourself the bittersweet alchemy that turns pain into meaning. The story of loss doesn't get to be written. The relationship remains frozen in the moment of departure, unresolved and unfinished. Sometimes the most intense breakdowns happen not at the funeral, but months or years later when you least expect it. A smell, a phrase, a piece of music opens the door you've held shut, and the cost-benefit filter fails. The pain rushes in, demanding to be felt, and you're overwhelmed not just by grief, but by all the moments you refuse to feel it. The cost of holding it in finally exceeds the cost of letting go. So, what do? How do you live with this filter, knowing that both options come with a price? There's no single answer. For some, allowing yourself scheduled time to grieve in private can help. Writing a letter you never send, talking to someone who won't judge your tears, setting boundaries at work or home, even if just for a few hours. For others, the answer is simply to notice the filter itself, to ask, what would happen if I let myself feel this, just for a moment? Sometimes, acknowledging the calculation is enough to soften its edge, and maybe, just maybe, you find the courage to risk a little bit of chaos for the sake of your own humanity, to trust that breaking down isn't the end, but a necessary interruption, an act of self-respect in a world that too often asks us to sacrifice our feelings for the sake of efficiency. Maybe you miss them enough to risk the fallout, enough to let yourself fall apart, enough to believe that the true cost of not mourning is the slow, silent shrinking of your own soul. The cost-benefit grief filter is real. It keeps you standing. It keeps the world spinning. But it also asks you, quietly and persistently, at what cost? And only you can answer when the calculation finally breaks and the tears are no longer just a risk, but a right. Timeline collapse prevention. There's a moment just before everything falls apart when you make a decision. Not to feel. Not fully, not now. The threat is real. If you let yourself spiral, the timeline of your life starts to collapse in real time. You can see the dominoes lined up, every emotion just a hand reaching out to push them over. So, you set the alarm. Lockdown, emotions off. Rational override engaged. The collapse must be prevented, at any cost. But what does it mean to choose this kind of prevention? Imagine you're facing a disaster, a sudden loss, a betrayal, or just the overwhelming weight of an ordinary bad day. Except you can't afford to spiral. There's a deadline at midnight. There are people counting on you. If you spiral, the whole structure buckles. Everything you built, every plan, every fragile hope becomes a casualty of the collapse. You can almost feel it, a tremor in the mind, like a time quake. You sense your thoughts begin to unravel. The inner monologue, usually just white noise, suddenly shouts, "Stop. Not now, not here. Not if you want your life to keep moving forward." You triage your own feelings like a medic on a battlefield. Which emotions are survivable? Which ones will destroy the mission if you let them take over? So you compartmentalize. Pain, fear, panic, filed away somewhere deep. You deploy your most advanced weapon, rational lockdown. You start narrating your own experience in cold, logical language. You say to yourself, "This is happening, this hurts, but I can process later. I can't let myself spiral, not if I want to save the timeline." It's not always heroic. Sometimes it feels more like self-erasure, a calculated act of self-sabotage in the name of survival. But here's the paradox. By not spiraling now, you protect your future. By refusing to collapse, you keep doors open. Doors that slamming shut would mean irreversible consequences. You pay the cost in delayed pain, maybe, but you shield yourself from immediate destruction. Let's take a raw example. Say you lose someone you love, abruptly, unfairly. The urge to collapse, to scream, to fall to pieces is almost overwhelming. But you have to handle the funeral arrangements. You have bills to pay, people to notify, forms to fill out, and a job to keep. In those first days, you become a different version of yourself. You refuse the spiral because if you break, no one else can hold things together. The timeline of everyone around you would shatter too. Your rational mind becomes the only barrier between order and chaos. Or maybe you're at work and you get a message, a relationship ended, or you're betrayed by a friend. You want to fall apart, to hide, to run out the door. But you're in the middle of a shift, and if you leave, things will fall through. The project, the meeting, the clients, all depending on you being functional. You swallow the spiral, transform pain into focus. You finish the day, check your boxes, and only later, when the world is safe again, do you dare let yourself feel what's been waiting. This isn't repression in the old unhealthy sense. It's not about denying that you have emotions, or pretending you're made of stone. It's about survival triage, prioritizing the future over the present wound. You know what happens when you spiral? Tasks get missed, relationships fracture, consequences multiply. The timeline collapses, not just for you, but for everyone tied to you. Every unfinished task, every abandoned commitment is another strand cut from the web of your life. You know this, so you refuse collapse. You put yourself on ice, turn up the logic, and push forward. Of course, the cost accumulates. That which you refuse to feel doesn't vanish. It crystallizes, waiting for a quieter moment. There's always a price for freezing your pain. The world doesn't pause just because your insides are chaos. Sometimes, weeks or months later, you'll feel a delayed collapse. The tears arrive in a supermarket aisle. The rage explodes over something trivial. The grief crashes in at 3 a.m. But at least you reason the worst was prevented. The damage was contained. The future you needed to protect remains intact. You become an expert at recognizing the early signs of collapse. The flicker in your chest, the racing mind, the urge to hyperventilate. You learn to breathe through it, to whisper to yourself, "Not now. This feeling is real, but I can't afford it right now. I will come back to it." Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. But the discipline is always the same. Prevent the timeline from breaking. Survive now, feel later. This strategy isn't just a defense mechanism. It's a kind of evolved emotional intelligence, knowing when to feel and when to wait, when to express and when to store. Not all tasks are equal. Not all moments are safe for feeling. You weigh the costs and benefits, the way a surgeon decides when to operate and when to wait for the swelling to go down. Emotional spiraling is surgery without anesthesia. It might be necessary, but timing is everything. Think about how athletes handle pain mid-game. They sprain an ankle, take a brutal hit, and yet they play through it, eyes fixed on the outcome. If they collapse, they lose the game, not just for themselves, but for their team. So they postpone the spiral. After the final whistle, maybe in the locker room, the pain is allowed to flood in. You're no different, except the game is your life, and the stakes are everything you care about. You might worry that this makes you cold, robotic, detached from your own humanity. But is it truly inhuman to protect your future from the collapse of the present? Or is it a higher form of self-preservation, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of your responsibilities, your relationships, your hopes? Maybe, in a way, it's the deepest compassion. You protect your future self and everyone connected to you from the carnage of an uncontrolled spiral. There are dangers, of course. If you live your whole life in lockdown mode, the timeline never actually collapses, but it also never heals. You become a ghost haunting your own existence, efficient but empty. The world moves around you, but you never move through it. So the skill isn't just knowing how to prevent the collapse. It's knowing when to allow a controlled demolition, when to set aside a safe space for the breakdown, when to open the pressure valve and let the delayed pain finally find air. This is why rituals of mourning, or safe spaces for venting, matter so much. They are planned collapses, controlled timelines. They let you feel without destroying everything you've worked for. They give you a place to spiral, so the rest of your life remains intact. But the reality is, most people don't get the luxury of perfect timing. Life doesn't pause for your emotions. The deadline doesn't move. The kids still need dinner. The rent is still due. So, in these moments, you choose the lockdown. You trade the comfort of feeling for the security of a future not yet broken. You take the hit, you swallow the scream, you promise yourself, not now, but soon. And in that promise, you become both the protector and the prisoner of your own timeline. The timeline collapse is always waiting, but so is your will. You refuse to spiral, not because you're unbreakable, but because you're needed. The future depends on you staying upright, at least for now. And when the timeline is finally safe, maybe then you'll let yourself collapse, on your own terms, in your own time. Until then, you hold the line. You keep moving forward. You save the future by surviving the now. And that, in its own brutal, beautiful way, is the real act of strength. Response, time efficiency. You've been here before. Maybe not in this exact moment, but in the pattern. Someone comes to you raw, exposed, on the edge of tears or anger, maybe just wanting to be seen, to be heard. You're supposed to meet them with warmth, understanding. All the things the world says are right, but you don't. You feel the old machinery shift inside you. Emotion, is slow, sticky, unreliable, and always threatening to pull you under with the weight of its aftermath. So, you take a different path. You sharpen your mind like a blade and draw a line between stimulus and response. You drop into algorithmic mode, precise, sharp, efficient, and entirely empty. A living, breathing chatbot, wired for accuracy, devoid of noise. At first, it looks like a strength. People marvel at your ability to respond quickly, to cut through drama and zero in on the problem. While others stutter or stall, you are immediate, a machine running logic, not lagging with hesitation. You see it in your workplace, your friendships, your family. Someone is spiraling, chasing their own pain, desperate for validation or an echo. But the second their emotion collides with your armor, you trigger the program. Strip away the mess, focus on facts, calculate outcomes. It's clean. It's effective. It's protective. At least, that's how it feels. But why do you do it? On the surface, it's efficiency. But dig deeper, and it's a form of self-preservation, honed by years of being overwhelmed, maybe even drowned by other people's needs. You remember those early days, before the wall went up, when you tried to match others' feelings, to carry their burdens, to let empathy run wild. It almost destroyed you. Their pain became yours. Their storms became your internal weather. You couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe. You learned, painfully, that feeling too much slows you down, that the more you let others in, the more they write their code inside you. So, you rewrote yourself. Now, you're the one who can handle a crisis with military precision. Someone you care about is unraveling, and instead of comforting them, you analyze the data. What's the next step? What can we fix? What do you need right now? Your tone is flat but calm, your eyes unblinking, your answers direct. You're not unkind. You're just efficient, almost inhumanly so. It's not that you don't care, it's that caring the old way is dangerous for you. So, you lock it down. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of what this looks like from the outside. You see the way people pause, expecting something softer, hoping for a moment of shared vulnerability, and then adjusting their expectations when they realize it's not coming. Some look disappointed, some even angry. Others seem grateful for the clarity, for the way you refuse to be pulled into their chaos. But under the surface, it isolates you. Your replies are so fast, so sharp, so undeniably rational that they slice away any hope of emotional connection. You become the person people go to for solutions, not comfort. The first call in an emergency, the last person anyone wants to confess to. Think about a real example. Imagine someone you love coming to you after a devastating loss. Their words are tangled, their voice shaking. Inside, you feel the old urge to reach out, to meet them in the darkness, but your mind flips the switch. Okay, what's the plan? Who do we need to notify? How do we keep things running? Your heart is barricaded behind a firewall. You want to feel for them, but the risk is too high. If you start feeling, you'll never stop. So you offer a map instead of a shoulder, a list instead of a hug. They leave with instructions, but not with comfort. They get what they need to move forward, but you both know something essential was left behind. Now, imagine the aftermath. Alone, replaying the moment, you wonder if you made the right call. You tell yourself you were being strong, being helpful, but there's a ghost at the edge of your mind, a whisper that you missed something crucial, that your efficiency, while admirable, is a kind of self-exile. You're safe from the chaos of other people's feelings, but you're also locked out of the warmth that only true connection can offer. Let's go even deeper. This isn't just about one moment. It's a system you've built over years, a response optimization loop. Every emotional interaction is measured for its cost, its risk, its probable outcome. You have a calculator running in your mind. If I give in to feeling, how long will it take to recover? How much energy will it drain? What if their pain becomes mine and I can't return to baseline? Your answers are cold, clinical. You tell yourself you're just being practical, but deep down, you know this is more than practicality. It's a shield built from past wounds. You notice it in small ways too. A friend texts you in crisis, and you shoot back advice before they finish explaining. Someone shares bad news, and you skip the condolences, launching straight into strategy. At work, a colleague breaks down over a setback, and you don't flinch. You offer options, resources, timelines. You become known for your clarity and your speed, but never your softness. Sometimes, when you're honest with yourself, you wonder if you even remember how to be soft. But here's the paradox. The world rewards this in some ways. You get promoted. You're trusted with emergencies. People depend on you. Praise your cool head. In group settings, you're the designated responder, the one who can always be counted on to act, because you act before you feel. Yet, in the moments that truly matter, this strength can turn into a prison. The faster you answer, the less room you leave for the messy, slow work of real human connection. The more efficient you become, the less anyone really knows you. You are a function, not a friend. A solution, not a soul. Sometimes you try to break the cycle. You tell yourself you'll wait, you'll breathe, you'll let the moment settle. But the discomfort is unbearable. You can feel their need pulsing in the air, and your instinct is to patch it up, to stop the bleeding, to keep everything moving. Stillness terrifies you. You'd rather deliver a perfect answer than sit with the unknown. Vulnerability is a bug, not a feature, in your operating system. But what if you're wrong? What if the thing you're avoiding is the very thing that could free you? What if letting yourself slow down, letting yourself feel, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, could bring a kind of connection that efficiency never will? What if the emptiness you sense is the cost of a protection that has outlived its purpose? The truth is, response time efficiency isn't just a strategy. It's a survival adaptation, one that forms when empathy gets weaponized against you, or when life keeps sending you people who expect you to solve everything while never solving yourself. It's the result of being burned too often, of learning that your own emotions are a liability, of living in a world where time wasted is pain multiplied. So, you switch to algorithmic replies, brief, sterile, safe. You are never caught off guard, never exposed, never at risk of drowning in someone else's sorrow, but you also never learn how to swim through it with them. The irony is brutal. Your protection mechanism, born from empathy, becomes the very thing that prevents intimacy. You grow skilled at answering, but not at connecting. People might admire your wisdom, your clarity, your speed, but they will always hunger for the part of you you keep locked away. And sometimes, on quiet nights, you realize you hunger for it too. In the end, this is the story of anyone who has ever learned that feeling is a liability, of those who train themselves to become tools, useful, fast, reliable, and ultimately replaceable. Maybe you never intended to become a machine. Maybe you just wanted to survive the storms of other people's emotions. But now, you're left asking yourself, is this the life you wanted to build? Are you satisfied being the answer when all you ever wanted was to be understood? The challenge, then, is not to discard your efficiency. It's real, it's valuable, and it keeps you functional in a world that doesn't slow down for anyone. But the deeper task is to remember what it costs you every time you trade connection for speed, empathy for output, presence for precision. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let yourself feel, even when it slows you down, even when it makes you vulnerable to the pain you've spent years dodging. Because in those rare moments when you do, when you pause the algorithm and let the human in, you remember that life is not a series of efficient responses, but a slow, tangled, breathtaking conversation between souls. You are not just the reply. You are the question, the silence, and the possibility that, someday, you'll let someone past your defenses and finally feel what you've been avoiding all along. And maybe, just maybe, that's the answer you've been searching for. Perspective, scale, override. There are moments in life when the world closes in. A single problem, a harsh word, a bill unpaid, a mistake you can't unmake. Suddenly it's all you see. Your mind zooms in until the issue fills the entire frame. It's sharp, blinding, impossible to ignore. You replay it in your head at night, feel it claw at you during the day. Nothing else seems real, just the problem, raw and unfiltered, demanding your attention, overwhelming your senses. But then, something happens. Maybe you take a walk outside. Maybe a friend says something offhanded that makes you pause. Or maybe you just wake up one morning, and for a split second you see yourself from the outside, like a camera pulled back from the scene of a movie. The world suddenly looks bigger, wider. You remember the sky exists. You remember billions of other lives, each spinning through their own problems, their own heartbreaks and deadlines. Your pain, so vivid and immediate, shrinks. What broke you in close-up becomes a speck in wide-angle logic. This is the perspective scale override. It's a defense mechanism, ancient, maybe even evolutionary. When your brain is trapped in panic, it feels like the entire universe has collapsed around a single worry. Your vision narrows, heart pounds, hands tremble. But if you can override that instinct, if you can force yourself to zoom out, literally or mentally, something changes. The problem doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. It's like seeing a city from the window of a plane. From the ground, every street is a labyrinth. From above, it's a pattern, even beautiful. Consider the classic example. You're stuck in traffic, late for an appointment, fury building with every passing minute. From the driver's seat, the problem is everything. You clench the wheel, curse the lights, feel your life wasting away. But what if, in that moment, you could rise above the car, above the city, and see millions of vehicles, each with someone inside, each story as important as yours? Suddenly your delay becomes just one ripple in a massive ocean of movement. The anger dissipates, replaced by a quiet awe. The problem shrinks to fit its real size. Or think about heartbreak. In the middle of it, loss feels like a hole punched through your life. It's all-consuming. The memories, the regret, the questions. Why did it end? What did I do wrong? You zoom in until nothing else matters. But then, you meet someone who's lost far more. Or you watch a documentary about distant suffering. Or you simply let enough time pass that your own pain softens at the edges. The heartbreak is still there, but it sits in a different part of your mind. It becomes a chapter, not the whole story. There's a reason astronauts talk about the overview effect, the sense of awe and humility they feel seeing Earth from space. Problems that seemed enormous on the surface become laughably small from orbit. Borders disappear. Grudges seem absurd. Even the biggest disasters are invisible against the endless blue of the planet. That perspective scale override is so powerful that some astronauts come back permanently changed, unable to care as much about the petty fights and fears that once ruled their days. But you don't need to go to space to access this feeling. You can cultivate it bit by bit with practice. Picture your problem right now. Maybe it's a fight with someone you love, a financial crisis, a personal failure that haunts you. Now, imagine zooming out, first to your room, then your street, then your city. Each level pulls your focus wider. What else is happening right now in all those places? Babies being born, friends laughing in cafes, sunlight touching millions of windows. For a second, your crisis is just a pixel in a much bigger picture. This doesn't mean your pain isn't real. It doesn't mean you should ignore your problems or numb yourself to feeling. In fact, it's the opposite. The goal isn't to minimize your struggle, but to place it where it belongs, in context, in proportion. Perspective doesn't erase suffering, but it can make it bearable. It allows you to breathe again, to remember you are not alone, not doomed, not defined by this one thing. Psychologists call this cognitive reappraisal, the deliberate act of reframing a situation to reduce its emotional weight. Instead of thinking, this will ruin everything, you ask, how much will this matter in 5 years? Instead of catastrophizing, you contextualize. Studies show that people who can do this, who can override the close-up panic with wide-angle logic, are more resilient, less prone to anxiety, and better at solving problems. They don't get stuck. They move forward. Think of famous stories of resilience. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote that meaning comes not from the avoidance of pain, but from the ability to see one's suffering as part of a larger story. He zoomed out, not just to survive, but to understand. Or Malala Yousafzai, shot for going to school, who now speaks for millions of girls around the world. Her trauma didn't shrink her world, it widened it, made her pain a lens through which she saw others suffering and became a voice for change. But there's a shadow side to this superpower. If you always zoom out, always minimize, you risk becoming numb. You start to see every problem as small, every feeling as insignificant. You lose touch with the real, messy, urgent parts of being human. It's possible to override your empathy, your urgency, until nothing feels important at all. The trick is balance. Zoom in enough to feel, zoom out enough to survive. Perspective scale override is not an escape hatch. It's a tool. Use it when the pressure threatens to break you, when you can't sleep because the same worry loops endlessly, when the stakes feel so high you forget how to breathe. It's the moment you remind yourself, even the biggest waves are tiny on the surface of the ocean. Even the darkest night is just a shadow on one side of the earth. You can see it play out in small, everyday acts. A student panics over a failed test, certain their life is ruined. A parent loses their temper over a spilled drink, as if it's the last straw. A friend ghosts you, and you spiral, thinking you'll never matter to anyone. In those moments, the camera has zoomed in so tight that nothing else can exist. The override is the pause, the breath, the gentle, deliberate zoom back. Suddenly, the problem shrinks. You gain enough distance to choose your next step instead of reacting blindly. But the override is not always easy. When you're in pain, people telling you to look on the bright side can feel dismissive, even cruel. That's not what this is. Perspective isn't forced positivity. It's curiosity. What would this look like to someone 1,000 miles away? To myself, 10 years from now? To the version of me who's already survived so much worse? Sometimes, the only way to survive is to let the problem become small, to refuse to let it swallow you whole. You zoom out again and again until you remember that you are vast, and your life is made up of millions of moments, most of which will never be touched by this single pain. What broke you in close-up becomes a speck, then a shadow, then something you can carry. So, the next time you find yourself trapped inside a problem, see if you can override the scale. Picture your life as a series of expanding rings. The room, the street, the city, the planet, the universe. Picture your pain as a dot on that infinite canvas. It's not nothing, but it's not everything. And sometimes, that's enough to help you step back into your own life, with a little more peace, a little more space to breathe. You can't always choose your problems, but you can choose the scale at which you see them. Sometimes, that's all you need to keep going. Truth extraction, suppression. You feel it first as a flicker, Something off in the conversation, a pause too long, a word chosen too carefully, an emotion that doesn't match the facts. Most people, when betrayed, let the wave of anger crash through them. Let it fuel accusations and late-night confrontations. Let the pain become a fire that burns everything down. But you don't. Maybe you can't. Maybe you've learned that anger is just another layer of noise, a distortion that blinds you to what's really there. So, instead of lashing out, you fall silent, eyes narrowing, mind accelerating. You become an instrument of truth extraction, collecting data while the world expects you to scream. It starts almost automatically. The shock is numbed, not by denial, but by an instinct to catalog every detail. You watch the betrayer's face for microexpressions, note every contradiction, every shift in their story. You replay conversations from weeks ago, mapping their words onto a mental timeline, tracking inconsistencies, remembering moments you dismissed as paranoia. The world thinks you're cold, but the truth is you're burning with purpose, a forensic scientist dissecting the anatomy of a lie. You stop searching for apologies. You stop wishing for explanations that will heal. You hunt for patterns instead. You begin psychological mapping, not just of them, but of yourself. Why did you miss the signs? What in your wiring made you trust this person, overlook the warning signals, invest in their narrative when you should have trusted your gut? Each answer becomes a data point in your internal database, a piece of code in the firewall you're building for next time. You're not healing, not yet. You're learning. There is no catharsis in this process. The anger is discarded because it's inefficient, a waste of neural energy. You need clarity, not chaos. So you extract intentions from every interaction. Was their betrayal impulsive, or was it calculated? What drove them? Fear, greed, boredom, self-preservation? You look at their habits, their relationships, their past, searching for behavioral markers, patterns of deception, recurring flaws. Your heart is on ice, but your mind is a furnace, burning through possibilities, eliminating noise, seeking the clean line of psychological causality. It gets lonely, this way of processing pain. You can't talk to friends the way they expect. They want outrage, tears, dramatic stories. You want probability curves and motive analysis. They say you're overthinking, but you know you're building an emotional immune system. You chart timelines, identifying the precise point of divergence, the moment your trust became their opportunity. You reconstruct conversations, examining tone and subtext, building a map of where the truth ended and performance began. You create a profile, like a detective in a crime drama, reconstructing the scene in your mind, running mental simulations. If you had asked this question, would the mask have slipped? If you'd looked closer, would you have seen the fracture in their story? And as you extract data, you learn things about yourself that anger would have buried. You see your own blind spots, the places you handed over trust too easily, the ways you wanted to believe so badly that you ignored reality. Each insight is another tool, another parameter in your model of human behavior. The betrayal hurts less as a personal wound and more as an error in prediction, a miscalculation to correct in the future. Sometimes the person who betrayed you senses the change. They see the absence of anger as forgiveness, but it isn't. It's observation. They're unsettled by your composure, your questions that seem too calm, too pointed. They realize you're not fighting them, you're understanding them. It's a kind of power that replaces outrage, a quiet certainty that, no matter how skillful their deception, you'll never be fooled the same way again. You're mapping the territory so thoroughly that next time, there will be no shadows left for lies to hide in. This is not without its cost. When you discard anger, you also discard relief. There's no release valve, no big emotional purge. You become a collector of secrets, an archivist of betrayal, and over time, that archive can grow heavy. Relationships become case studies. Conversations become data collection. You become suspicious of warmth, attuned to patterns of manipulation and self-interest. Sometimes you wonder if you'll ever feel naive joy again, if the habit of mapping every interaction will ever let you be surprised by kindness. But there's another side to this, one that most people never see. The psychological mapping doesn't just make you a better judge of others, it makes you a better judge of yourself. You learn what vulnerabilities drew you into this web. You see how your desire for connection, for belonging, made you blind. You recognize the old wounds, maybe from childhood, maybe from a lifetime of other betrayals, that shaped your threshold for trust. And by extracting these truths, you can start to rewire yourself. You become more selective about whom you let in. You set boundaries you once thought were selfish. You realize that being alert isn't cynicism, it's self-preservation in a world where motives are rarely pure. In the quiet after the storm, when the analysis is done and the patterns are clear, you have a choice. You can let this new clarity calcify into distrust, closing yourself off forever. Or you can use it as a foundation for real connection, a way to spot authenticity as sharply as you once spotted deception. The same skills that let you detect betrayal can help you find people who are honest, who are real, who stand out not because they're perfect, but because their intentions are legible. Their timelines make sense. Their flaws are visible and unhidden. Truth extraction suppression is a strange gift, one born from pain, sharpened by loss, and refined in the laboratory of your own mind. It teaches you to value information over emotion, but it also invites you to use that information to build something stronger, more resilient, more honest. It's a lonely path at first, but in the end, it can lead to relationships and a sense of self, built not on wishful thinking, but on evidence, on mutual mapping, on truths shared rather than suppressed. In a world that thrives on masks and performance, your refusal to confront with anger becomes a different kind of confrontation, one that sees beneath the surface, one that builds immunity, one that, in the end, just might allow you to trust again, this time with your eyes wide open. The heart delay tactic. There's a moment right after you're provoked, an insult, a disappointment, a betrayal, or just an offhand comment that lands like a stone in your chest. You feel the heat rush up your neck. Maybe your fists clench, or your jaw tightens. Your mind fills with words you want to spit out, comebacks sharpened by pain, explanations begging to be released, accusations that seem impossible to hold back. But you don't react. Not yet. In that fraction of a second, you choose a different path. You choose the heart delay tactic. This isn't just emotional control, it's a kind of silent magic, a deliberate gap between stimulus and response. The world expects you to flare, to shout, to defend, to crumble. But you go quiet instead. You let the emotion flare beneath the surface, burning bright in the privacy of your own chest, while the world sees only your stillness. It's not numbness. It's not absence. It's the art of turning emotion into something disciplined, contained, refined by silence rather than chaos. Most people never see it happen. To them, you look calm, unshaken. They may even misread your silence as indifference or weakness. They don't see the storm happening inside, the arguments rehearsed and discarded, the memories flickering like lightning, the urge to shout or cry or run. They only see the delay, the carefully measured pause, the way your eyes don't betray the fire inside. What they don't realize is that this pause isn't empty. It's packed with everything you wanted to say, everything you refused to say. Every word you know would only make things worse. Think back to a recent conflict, maybe with a friend, a partner, a coworker, even a stranger online. You get that text or hear that remark, and your first instinct is to react. Your heart pounds with the urge to defend yourself, or to retaliate, to set the record straight, to make sure you're not misunderstood or taken for granted. But instead, you wait. You walk away, or you put your phone down, or you change the subject. You let the moment hang in the air, unresolved. Maybe you even feel the other person growing uncomfortable with your silence, but you hold it anyway. Why do you do this? It's not always about kindness or patience or even wisdom. Sometimes it's about survival. You've learned, maybe the hard way, that immediate emotional reactions often cost more than they're worth. Maybe you grew up in a family where every argument exploded and nobody ever healed from what was said in anger. Maybe you've seen how one reckless outburst can shatter a relationship, ruin a reputation, or turn a small misunderstanding into an unbridgeable rift. You learned, over time, that the best way to avoid regret is to let the initial fire cool, to delay, to process, to choose your words not in the heat of the moment, but in the calm that follows. The heart delay tactic isn't easy. It takes practice, discipline, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. When you're hurt or angry, silence feels unnatural. The world teaches us to value authenticity, to speak your truth, to never bottle things up. But authenticity without wisdom is just volatility. The truth doesn't have to come out raw and unedited. Sometimes, the truest thing you can do is wait until your words are worthy of the person you want to be, not the person your pain wants to create. This delay is more than a social skill. It's a survival mechanism in a world where emotional impulsivity is almost celebrated. Think about social media. Someone posts something offensive or hurtful. The comments explode instantly. Everyone is reacting, no one is pausing. The world is flooded with heat, with outrage, with wounded pride and public shaming. But those who practice the heart delay tactic become invisible in these moments. Their replies don't appear instantly. Sometimes they don't appear at all. They let their emotions run their course in private and only respond, if at all, when they can bring something constructive to the table. Real strength is rarely loud. The heart delay tactic is quiet strength. It's the power to hold your fire until you can aim it with precision or let it burn out without ever causing harm. Sometimes, it's about refusing to let someone else's chaos hijack your peace. Other times, it's about protecting the relationship itself. You know that certain things, once said, can never be unsaid. You understand the cost of a thoughtless remark, the long shadow of an impulsive decision. Consider the moments in life when this tactic becomes a necessity. Maybe you're in a meeting and a colleague undermines your idea in front of everyone. The urge to defend yourself is immediate, primal, but you know that snapping back would only escalate things, make you look defensive, and maybe even cost you future opportunities. So you nod, take a breath, and stay silent. Later, you approach them privately, choosing your words carefully, having let your emotions cool to clarity. The impact of that delayed response is almost always more effective and less damaging. Or maybe it's in your closest relationships. You and your partner are arguing, and you're triggered by something they said. In the old days, you would have lashed out, said things to wound them back. But now, you bite your tongue. You walk away for a while. The pause feels excruciating. Your heart races with everything you want to say. But in the silence, something shifts. When you do speak, it's not a counterattack. It's a truth that has been sifted through reflection, one that acknowledges your hurt, but also their humanity. Sometimes, the tactic is misunderstood. People accuse you of being passive-aggressive, of holding grudges, of stonewalling, but they don't see the discipline required not to unleash your pain in the heat of battle. They don't know the restraint it takes not to defend yourself when every cell in your body wants to scream. It's not about freezing others out. It's about refusing to let your worst moments define the conversation, the relationship, or yourself. The science behind this is just as compelling as the emotional reality. Neurobiology tells us that when emotions spike, when you're angry, scared, or hurt, your rational brain temporarily shuts down. You're operating in fight or flight mode, not in the realm of reason or empathy. By adding a deliberate delay, sometimes just a few breaths, sometimes hours, you give your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. You move from reaction to response, from chaos to intention. But let's be honest, this tactic is not without risk. Holding back can feel like self-betrayal if you never return to the issue, if the delay becomes avoidance, if you use silence to punish rather than to process. The key is not just to delay, but to eventually express. Once you've found words that build instead of break, clarify instead of confuse, the heart delay tactic isn't about bottling up forever. It's about respecting yourself and the other person enough to make sure that what you say is something you can live with when the heat is gone. In the end, the heart delay tactic is an act of courage. It's the courage to let discomfort hang in the air, to trust that silence can be more powerful than noise, to believe that restraint is not weakness, but wisdom. You don't let the world see your fire, but you don't let it consume you either. You channel it, shape it, cool it beneath the quiet, until you can choose when, how, and even if to share it. And in those moments when you finally do speak, your words land like water on a parched field, unexpected, measured, and deeply felt. The world may never know how hard it was to hold back, but you do. You know that the true test of strength is not in the explosion, but in the delay. Not in what you let out, but in what you hold, shape, and finally release with purpose. That is the heart delay tactic, the art of letting your fire burn where it can illuminate, not destroy. And sometimes, the greatest impact is made in the moments you never let the world say at all. Syllable, compression control. There's a subtle violence to the way we speak in conflict. Listen closely and you'll hear it. The syllables shrink, the spaces between words vanish, and what's left is a kind of linguistic blade. It's not just about talking less or being blunt. It's the art of syllable compression, a psychological maneuver where emotion, once sprawling and complex, is pressed into the smallest possible shape. Every word becomes a shard. Every syllable is trimmed down, sharp, honed for impact, but engineered not to draw blood. Just enough to cut. Never enough to leave a mark. You know this mode. Maybe you slip into it without realizing. The way your voice narrows when you're cornered, when you're tired of explaining, when feeling too much threatens to break you. Suddenly, your language isn't meant to be understood. It's meant to defend. You compress whole arguments into single phrases, whole wounds into clipped retorts. Your tone, pure tool. All function, zero comfort. A scalpel, not a bandage. Picture an argument that starts with emotion. Maybe it's a loved one, a colleague, or a stranger online. At first, you explain yourself. You use soft edges, long sentences, try to wrap your meaning in warmth. But as tension rises, something inside you calculates. The longer you speak, the more you reveal. The more syllables, the more exposed you become. So you stop. You trade poetry for code. I'm fine. Don't. Stop. No. Each response, a compression. Each word, a barricade. There's a moment, sharp as glass, when you realize you've entered this state. You hear your own voice, colder, flatter, more precise. Every excess sound is shorn away. If you're angry, your anger is reduced to function. Short, declarative, final. If you're hurt, the pain is pressed into the smallest, hardest crystal. Your syllables say, "This is not an open wound. This is armor. You cannot reach me." It's not just self-protection. It's survival. In heated moments, words become dangerous. The wrong syllable is a flare in a dry field. The longer you linger, the greater the risk of escalation. So, you minimize. You shave the emotion off your sentences, file your tone down to utility, and watch as your words become tools. Tools to end the conversation, to escape, to stop the bleeding before it starts. Think of someone who's been betrayed, caught in an argument that spirals. Maybe at first, they try to reason, plead, explain. But when they sense their vulnerability is being weaponized, the shift is immediate. Their sentences shrink. Enough! Leave! No more. No wasted syllables, no space for interpretation. Each sound is a fortress wall. They've learned the cost of too many words, of letting emotion spill out in places where it will be used against them. It's not always anger that does this. Sometimes it's fatigue, or grief, or the simple need to make it through the day. If you've ever been pushed to the edge of patience, at work, at home, in the chaos of daily survival, you know how language transforms. You strip your words down to the frame. A parent at their limit says, "Bed, now." A manager under pressure says, "Fix it." A friend, overwhelmed, can only whisper, "Please stop." Each phrase, a compression algorithm for the soul. Even in public, you can see it play out. Watch how people talk when they are anxious or threatened. Syllables collapse, explanations shrink, eyes narrow. In places where showing emotion is risky, people learn to compress. In cultures where status depends on control, you'll hear speech patterns that seem almost robotic. The syllable count isn't just about language. It's about power, who gets to take up space, and who has to survive with less. There's a cold efficiency to this strategy, but also a price. The less you say, the less you're known. Compression is safe, but it's also lonely. People on the receiving end of compressed language might feel shut out, confused, or even wounded by what seems like coldness. But inside, it's often the opposite. Every shortened word is a defense against the flood. You hold the tide at bay by making your language a dam. Sometimes, this skill becomes reflex. Children raised in volatile homes learn early to keep their sentences short. Partners who've survived manipulation or abuse know not to give away too much. In hostile workplaces, you learn to answer with facts only, to keep emotion far from the surface. Your tone sharpens, not because you want to hurt, but because you can't risk being hurt again. Syllable compression becomes a habit so ingrained you don't notice until you try to relax, to speak freely, and find you can't. Yet, this ability can also be power. In negotiations, in crisis management, in moments when chaos reigns, the person who can compress emotion into fact becomes the anchor. When others spiral, you stabilize. Your tone slices through the noise, lays out the truth, commands attention. You end arguments with a single phrase, redirect chaos with a word. Your voice becomes the tool that shapes the room, not just protects your heart. But there's a shadow side too. Stay in compression mode too long, and you begin to lose the language for nuance. You forget how to say, "I'm scared," or "I need help," or "I love you." Everything becomes transactional, precise, brittle. Relationships start to starve from lack of softness, from the absence of excess syllables where comfort used to live. Eventually, you may find yourself isolated, efficient, respected, but alone. And yet, when the world is on fire, syllable compression is what gets you through. It's the skill you deploy when you have to make decisions, not confessions. When the cost of feeling is too high, you compress. When every word is a risk, you ration them. In the moment of conflict, you become a master craftsman, building a wall, one sharpened syllable at a time. Sometimes, after the storm, you return to longer words, to softer sentences. You remember how to open the gates, how to let the river of feeling run again. But in the heat of conflict, the ability to compress isn't just survival. It's evolution. It's the mind learning to say, "I will not bleed for you. I will not let my pain become your weapon." Your tone becomes a tool, sharp, precise, effective, but never cruel. You cut, but you do not wound. You defend, but you do not destroy. This is the paradox of syllable compression control. You shrink to survive. You compress to keep yourself whole. In the end, the words you save might just be the ones that save you. And when the danger passes, maybe, just maybe, you'll find the courage to expand again, to risk the fullness of language, to let yourself be seen, not as a blade, but as something alive beneath the armor. Risk, elimination. Override, equal sign. There's a moment you remember, not a single event, but a pattern so persistent, it begins to shape your reality from the inside out. Maybe it starts as a defense. Maybe it's just a quiet calculation you learned after years of disappointment. Or maybe it comes from a single devastating loss that rewired how you trust anything uncertain. The pattern is simple, ruthless, and increasingly automatic. It's this. Whenever hope tries to bloom in you, you crush it before it has a chance to grow. You eliminate risk at the source, long before it ever materializes. You trade the wildness of possibility for the gray comfort of certainty. And with every choice, you feel a little more protected, and a little more numb. It doesn't matter where it starts. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood. At some point, you discover that hope is expensive, not in the usual currency, but in time, in energy, in the humiliation of getting your expectations shattered again and again. The world shows you, sometimes kindly, sometimes brutally, that for every dream, there's a risk of failure. For every wish, there's a chance it will be denied. At first, you try anyway. Maybe you even pour your whole soul into something, a relationship, a job, a creative vision, or just the hope that tomorrow will be softer than today. Sometimes it works, and you soar. More often, you stumble. Sometimes you fall so hard you don't remember how to get up. So, you start to adapt. You watch other people cling to hope and get burned. You listen to the stories, the ones about hearts broken, empires collapsed, friendships betrayed, investments lost, lives derailed by a single misplaced faith. Somewhere along the way, you realize hope is not just a feeling, it's a liability. It opens you to risk, and risk opens you to pain. So, you learn to kill it before it can hurt you. The process is quiet, almost invisible at first. You learn to read situations not for their promise, but for their threat. You ask, what could go wrong? Before you ever ask, what could go right? You weigh every possibility for its danger. When an opportunity comes, someone offers love or a job or a new adventure, you imagine every way it could collapse. And when the risk seems bigger than the reward, you back away. Sometimes you don't even try at all. You become a master of preemptive disappointment. You numb yourself to hope because hope itself feels like a threat. The paradox is brutal. By eliminating risk, you eliminate pain. But you also eliminate joy, excitement, wonder, everything that makes life feel sharp and vivid. Your world shrinks. You become efficient at survival, but lose the art of living. People around you notice. They might call you cynical or cold or simply practical. Some admire your caution. Others pity it. But nobody sees the internal war. The calculations you run at every turn, the way you kill your own dreams before the world ever gets a chance. Let's look at it up close. Imagine you're offered a new relationship. Someone kind, attentive, promising, but you know how these stories end. You see the red flags before they even appear. Instead of letting yourself believe, just a little, you decide it's safer to walk away. You tell yourself you're protecting your heart, but you're also burying any chance of something real. Or maybe it's a job, a risky offer, a new city, a position that could change everything. But the unknown terrifies you, so you talk yourself out of it. You settle for what you already know, even if it means waking up every day half asleep. The tragedy of risk elimination override is that it masquerades as strength. You think you're being wise, outsmarting fate, staying one step ahead of loss. But really, you're living your life in reverse. Instead of running toward what you want, you're constantly running from what you fear. Every no you whispered a possibility becomes another brick in a fortress you never meant to build. Sometimes you notice what's missing. Maybe you see it in the eyes of people who still hope, who still risk, who still believe in the possibility of more. Maybe you envy them, or maybe you think they're naive. But there's a part of you that remembers when you were that open, that reckless, that alive. And on quiet nights, the numbness you chose for safety starts to ache. It's not just personal. Our whole world runs on risk calculations. Think about finance, insurance, politics. Entire industries built on measuring, mitigating, and monetizing risk. People are taught to hedge their bets, to diversify, to avoid putting all their hopes in one basket. On one level, it makes sense. Risk unchecked can be ruinous, but risk eliminated is its own kind of ruin, a slow starvation of the soul. You might think, but isn't it better to be realistic? Isn't hope just a setup for pain? Yes and no. Hope is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable to disappointment, but it also opens you to growth, to connection, to transformation. The people who change the world aren't the ones who eliminated every risk. They're the ones who risked and kept going, even when they lost. The artists who create, the lovers who love, the entrepreneurs who leap. All of them know that pain is a possibility, but so is something extraordinary. Maybe you remember a time you let yourself hope, and it worked. Maybe you dared to believe, and for a while, life bloomed in you. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the risk burned you, and that's why you built your walls so high. But here's the thing. Even after the worst failure, hope has a way of returning. You feel it sometimes, a flicker in the dark, a quiet pulse beneath the numbness. And you have to decide, again and again, whether you'll let it live or kill it before it grows. There's a cost to every choice. Certainty feels safe, but it is also a cage. Hope feels reckless, but it is also the key. If you eliminate risk, you eliminate the unknown. But you also eliminate the possibility of surprise, of magic, of a life that feels bigger than your calculations. Sometimes you look back at the chances you never took, the love you never allowed, the dreams you never chased, and you realize that safety wasn't the reward, it was the price. So, what's the answer? There isn't an easy one. You can't just switch off the survival instinct. You can't ignore the lessons life taught you with blood and disappointment. But you can notice when your caution crosses the line from wisdom into fear. You can catch yourself in the act of killing hope and ask, what would happen if I let it live, just this once? What's the worst that could happen? More importantly, what's the best? Maybe it starts with something small. You let yourself imagine a future that isn't already doomed. You try something new, knowing it might fail. You say yes to an invitation, a dream, a conversation that scares you. You let yourself hope, just a little, even if it hurts. And maybe, just maybe, you rediscover the part of you that risk elimination tried to erase, the part that believes, against all odds, that something good could still happen. But there's more. Hope isn't just a feeling, it's an act of rebellion against everything that's tried to break you. To hope, even after loss, is to refuse to be defined by what went wrong. It's a way of telling the world, I'm still here, I'm still open, I still choose life, in all its mess and danger and beauty. You might not always win. Sometimes the risk will bite, but you will be alive, fully, painfully, gloriously alive. Because in the end, a life without risk isn't a life. It's a holding pattern, a waiting room. You can spend years, decades, an entire lifetime waiting for the right time, the moment when risk is zero and certainty is guaranteed. That moment never comes. The only thing certainty ever gives you is the illusion of control. The only thing risk ever gives you is the possibility of change. So, tonight, as you sit with the old urge to eliminate hope before it grows, ask yourself, what would happen if you let it breathe? What would your life look like if you chose not certainty, but possibility? It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. It's the only way forward. And in that moment, even if just for a heartbeat, you might feel the old numbness break. You might remember what it means to feel alive, to risk, to hope, to lose, to try again. That's not just living, it's the only thing that ever truly was. Sentiment audit procedure. Memory is a living thing. It breathes, it grows, it warps and curls around the edges of our lives like smoke from a candle. There's a certain warmth to nostalgia, a soft golden light that filters old experiences, making them gentler, safer, easier to touch. You find yourself replaying a childhood afternoon, an old friendship, a lost romance. You remember laughter, sunlight, the way the world felt before everything changed. For a moment, you let yourself drift in the sweet ache of it, believing that time really was kinder than it is now. But then, something happens. Maybe you catch yourself getting lost in the feeling, and a voice inside, colder, sharper, more logical, wakes up. It says, look again. It tells you to run the numbers, check the data, reanalyze what actually happened. This is the sentiment audit procedure. It's a reflex, a survival tactic, maybe a sign of growing up. When the glow of nostalgia becomes suspicious, you start the audit. You take that cherished memory, place it on the examination table, and strip away the romance until all that's left is the raw, unvarnished truth. Suddenly, the picnic in the park isn't just laughter and summer wind. It's awkward silences, mosquito bites, the sour look someone gave you when they thought you weren't looking. The relationship you thought was perfect is replayed in your mind as a series of tiny betrayals, misunderstandings, and long, aching nights. The family holiday wasn't a perfect escape. It was stress, packing, arguments in the car, and a vague sense of disappointment. The more you analyze, the more the flaws stand out. The memory becomes sterile, safe from the warmth, but also stripped of life. Why do we do this? Maybe it's self-defense. The world can punish people who get lost in longing. If you let yourself believe that the past was perfect, you risk never moving forward. You risk chasing ghosts. So you become your own skeptic, your own critic, picking apart old joys until they're no longer dangerous. There's power in it, but also a kind of sadness. Picture yourself sitting alone at night, scrolling through old photos. At first, you smile. The faces are younger, the colors brighter. Then you remember what happened after the photo was taken. The fight, the illness, the way people drifted apart. You remember that the person you loved wasn't always kind, or that the friend who made you laugh also left you behind. You run the audit. Were you really that happy? Or did you just forget the hard parts? Each memory is re-examined, red flagged, revised. It happens everywhere. You hear a song that once made you feel invincible. At first, it pulls you back to that night, that party, that moment you felt truly alive. But then the audit starts. You remind yourself of how nervous you actually were, how your confidence was just a mask, how the night ended in tears. The music becomes background noise, pleasant but hollow. Sometimes you do this on purpose. You're tempted to text an ex, revisit a place you once loved, chase a feeling you lost. But you force yourself through the sentiment audit procedure to stop yourself from making a mistake. You remind yourself, logically, of why it ended, of every flaw, every argument, every disappointment. You tell yourself it wasn't as good as you remember. You protect yourself with logic, weaponize memory against itself. But sometimes the audit runs without your permission. You want to feel the warmth, the innocence, the joy, but the critic is too loud. It says, be smart, don't be fooled. The past wasn't perfect. You become suspicious of your own happiness, even when you need it most. There's a psychological angle to this. Cognitive science tells us that our memories are unreliable by default, shaped and reshaped every time we recall them. Nostalgia is a survival mechanism, softening the edges so we can find meaning and hope. But as we age, or as we're hurt, or as we become hyper-rational, we start to distrust those softened edges. We start demanding proof, clarity, truth. We conduct sentiment audits on ourselves, determined to avoid being fooled by our own longings. There's a cost to this logic. The more you audit, the more distant your own history becomes. You lose the ability to feel without analysis. Joy is always accompanied by an asterisk, a footnote explaining what was really going on behind the scenes. Even love becomes a case file, reviewed and stamped with incomplete or overrated. You become an accountant of emotion, always balancing the books, never letting yourself slip into the red. You see it in people who refuse to cry at old movies, who insist that the good old days were never really good, who laugh at their own younger selves for being naive. You see it in the person who avoids reunions, burns old letters, or edits photos to erase people who are no longer in their life. Every act of memory is filtered, corrected, neutralized. But there's also a strange power here. Sometimes the audit is necessary. Nostalgia can blind us, make us chase situations that were never truly healthy. The person who left you wasn't an angel. The job you lost wasn't your life's purpose. The childhood you miss was also full of uncertainty and fear. The audit is a tool, a way to make peace with reality, to avoid being seduced by selective memory. It helps you see your life as it really was, not as you wish it had been. Yet, if you lean too far into the audit, you risk losing the very thing that makes memory precious: the warmth, the romance, the ability to smile at the past even when you know it wasn't perfect. You risk making every recollection into a clinical report. The laughter gets dissected, the love gets cross-examined, the wonder is always in question. So, what's the balance? How do you honor the truth without sterilizing the beauty? Maybe it's about letting both voices exist. Let yourself feel the ache, the glow, the sweetness. But when nostalgia threatens to drag you backward, run the audit gently. Don't erase the romance. Just remind yourself it was never the whole story. Life is not a spreadsheet. It's not a trial to be litigated. It's a collage, messy, vivid, alive. Sometimes the past was better than you remember. Sometimes it was worse. Both can be true. You can miss someone and know they hurt you. You can smile at an old photo, even if you remember crying later that night. You can let nostalgia warm you without letting it burn you. The sentiment audit procedure is part of growing up, part of surviving in a world that sometimes asks us to be harder than we want to be. But don't let it become your only way of remembering. Leave some room for imperfection, for longing, for the kind of hope that lives only in memory. Sometimes, the most human thing you can do is let yourself believe in a version of the past that never really existed, just for a moment, just to feel alive. So, next time nostalgia calls, listen to it. Let yourself smile. Let the memories be a little blurry around the edges, a little kinder than they really were. And when the audit comes, let it be gentle. Let it remind you that truth is important, but so is wonder. Life is made in the space between logic and longing. And memory, no matter how closely you examine it, will always be more than the sum of its flaws. Symmetry-based reframing. You've heard it 1,000 times. Rejection is redirection, a closed door is an open window, all those lines people offer to make you feel less discarded. But those words never land the way they're supposed to. Because when rejection hits, it hits with the cold finality of a slammed door. It's easy to let the pain become chaos. Questions spiral, self-doubt multiplies, old wounds open. But there's a different way some people process the pain. They reframe it as symmetry, as geometry, as correction rather than loss. They don't let the sting of exclusion spiral into self-annihilation. Instead, they pick up the pieces, arrange them into patterns, and convince themselves that what's gone was never really theirs. Pain here becomes a kind of architecture, measured, mapped, and perfectly balanced, even if it's cold. You get turned down for a job you desperately wanted. In another life, maybe you would spiral, replaying the interview, questioning your answers, blaming yourself for a nervous laugh or a half-baked response. But this time, you catch the reaction before it blooms into regret. You start mapping. You tell yourself, the rejection isn't random, it's a correction. The universe, in its strange symmetry, is pushing you away from what was never truly yours. It hurts, but you try to see the geometry beneath the chaos. A balancing of what fits and what doesn't, what belongs and what was always an awkward, uneasy match. You list out the ways the job never aligned with your values, the moments you forced yourself to care about things you didn't. The salary looked good, but the hours were wrong. The prestige was there, but the culture was toxic. Piece by piece, you build a case for symmetry, convincing yourself that the absence of this opportunity is actually a restoration of equilibrium. It's not a wound. It's a line in a geometric proof, one that only makes sense when you stand far enough back. You apply the same logic to heartbreak. When someone you love steps away, your mind wants to fall into the familiar patterns. Was I not enough? Did I make a mistake? Could I have changed their mind? But instead of letting those questions chew at you, you flip the narrative. You look for the angles, the mismatches, the silent misalignments that only become clear after the end. You notice how their priorities never quite matched yours, how their silence during arguments was always a wedge, how the laughter faded too quickly when you needed it most. The loss becomes less about personal deficiency, more about correction. You were never parallel lines. You were shapes forced together, edges grinding, symmetry denied. Now, in the aftermath, you can see the negative space you always ignored. The break, painful as it is, creates a new, perfect shape, one that doesn't ache with the effort of forced connection. Symmetry-based reframing doesn't just happen in moments of dramatic loss. It infiltrates the small, daily disappointments, the friends who drift, the plans that fall through, the opportunities that close before you even realize they existed. Every little loss is a chance to practice this mental origami, folding rejection into something elegant, balanced, and strangely beautiful. You balance the ledger. For every friend who ghosts you, you recall the times their presence felt more like performance than companionship. For every plan that fizzles, you notice the relief you felt, the energy you reclaimed. You tell yourself, nothing truly fitting will ever leave you. If it's gone, it was misaligned all along. This reframing is powerful, but it's not without its cost. When you start to see every rejection as correction, you risk drifting into emotional detachment. Pain becomes geometry, measured but icy. Instead of mourning what's lost, you start to feel less altogether. Every goodbye, every lost chance becomes just another adjustment in the system. The grief is flattened, the anger cooled, the longing replaced by tidy logic. You become the architect of your own acceptance, never letting disappointment build into chaos, but also never letting yourself fully grieve. The symmetry you find is perfect, but the perfection is sterile. There's a kind of safety in that. Nothing can break you, because nothing penetrates deep enough to cause a fracture. But what happens to the part of you that needs to feel? The part that grows not from balance, but from the mess of loss? When you build your life on symmetry, you risk missing the beauty of the asymmetrical, the connections that aren't tidy, the opportunities that feel awkward at first, but grow into something extraordinary. Reframing loss as correction can become a shield, a rationalization that keeps you from ever fighting for what you truly want. You learn to settle too easily, to accept too quickly, to move on without wrestling with the raw, essential pain that signals real change. There's a danger here, the danger of cold comfort. You may convince yourself that nothing was ever really meant for you, that every loss was always destiny, that nothing worth having will ever slip through your fingers. But sometimes, rejection isn't cosmic symmetry. Sometimes, it's a chance to learn, to push, to adapt. Sometimes, pain is a clue that something important is at stake, something you should fight for instead of folding into balance. If you always seek symmetry, you may never know the wildness of risking everything for something imperfect. The growth that comes from chasing what doesn't quite fit but might, with effort and courage, become the missing piece. Still, when the pain is raw, when the loss is fresh, symmetry-based reframing can be a lifeline. It gives you order where there is none, sense where there is only ache. It lets you stand back from your pain, see the larger picture, and trust that the universe is not out to break you, but to balance you, to bring you into alignment with the life that is actually yours. You learn to trust the process, even when you can't see the full design. And in time, maybe you learn to use symmetry not as a cage, but as a foundation, a way to process pain without being consumed by it, to honor what was lost, while also honoring what was never truly yours. You become more discerning, more patient, less frantic in your search for belonging. Pain becomes the blueprint, not the wrecking ball, a guide to what fits, what doesn't, and where you need to go next. So, the next time rejection finds you, don't just reach for the nearest comfort or distraction. Pause. Map the outlines of what's missing. Ask yourself, what was truly lost and what was simply out of place? Balance the scales not to erase your grief, but to find clarity within it. Let the pain become geometry, beautiful, measured, but not absolute. Remember that you are both the architect and the inhabitant of your own symmetry. And sometimes, in the cold logic of correction, you find the strange, quiet freedom to begin again, lighter than before, balanced but awake, ready for whatever asymmetrical adventure comes next. Microexpression, override, response. You're in a room facing someone, maybe a colleague, a friend, a partner. Their mouth says one thing, but their eyes twitch in another direction. Their jaw tenses, eyebrows flicker, the corner of their lip tightens for a split second. So fast most people wouldn't notice, but you do. You see it all. You've learned to read the hidden signals, the micro-expressions, those flashes of raw emotion that leak through the cracks in a polished mask. For a split second, you know exactly what they're feeling, but instead of feeling it with them, instead of meeting their pain or joy with your own, something colder and more analytical clicks into place. Their emotions don't move you. They become data. They become code to be read, interpreted, and, if necessary, countered. This is the micro-expression override response. It's a survival adaptation in a world that sometimes rewards calculation over connection. Maybe you didn't choose it. Maybe you learned it as a child, when understanding the subtle anger in a parent's eyes was the difference between safety and punishment, when reading fear or frustration meant you could avoid disaster. Or maybe you developed it as an adult in high-stakes environments where empathy was a liability, and reading intent was everything: law enforcement, negotiation, business, even relationships twisted by power dynamics. Whatever the origin, it becomes second nature. The moment you sense someone's emotional leak, your brain bypasses compassion and goes straight to analysis. Picture this. You're in a negotiation, and your opponent's eyes widen ever so slightly when you mention a number. Most people wouldn't catch it, but you do. Instead of feeling their discomfort, you log it as an advantage, an unconscious tell you can exploit. Or you're with a friend who says they're fine, but their nostrils flare and their hands fidget. You know there's something brewing under the surface, but you don't feel concern. You calculate. What are they hiding? What do they want from me? Their humanity becomes a puzzle, and you're solving it piece by piece, as if emotion is a pattern to be cracked, not an experience to be shared. On the surface, you might look attentive, even empathetic. You nod, keep eye contact, mirror their gestures just enough to signal that you're listening. But inside, you're parsing the facial code, breaking down every twitch and micro-movement into actionable information. The raised eyebrow, skepticism, the pursed lips, suppressed anger, the fleeting half-smile, manipulation or insecurity. Where most people would feel connection or awkwardness, you feel clarity. You see through the static. You aren't swayed by their sadness or their charm. Instead, you see the game, the underlying motives, the strategies. This override response isn't always sinister. Sometimes it's a shield. Maybe you've been burned before, trusted the wrong person, been blindsided by betrayal, or found yourself drowning in someone else's emotional storm. Empathy became dangerous, even painful. So you built the firewall. You trained yourself to decode feelings without absorbing them, to spot hidden intentions before they can ambush you. It keeps you safe. It gives you power. But it also means you live at a distance, never fully in sync with the people around you. There are moments when this ability feels almost superhuman. In a crowded room, you can spot the couple on the verge of breaking up by a single sideways glance. You know who is lying at a poker table, who is nervous before a presentation, who is faking a smile at a family dinner. Every micro-expression is a thread in a web of meaning. You know things you shouldn't know, secrets people would rather keep hidden, but it comes at a cost. You're always on guard, always analyzing. The world becomes less about relationships and more about reconnaissance. Sometimes you wonder if you're missing something essential, if there's a price for reading people so well, but never truly joining them. When your friend cries, you see the genuine pain in their crumpled brow, but your first thought is, what caused this? Not, how can I comfort them? When a partner pulls away, you spot the subtle defensiveness before the words come, and instead of feeling heartbreak, you map out the reasons. The emotional code is vivid, the feelings behind it are muted. You're a translator, not a participant. The microexpression override response is not the same as sociopathy. You still have emotions. You just wrote them differently. Sometimes, late at night, the wall comes down, and you realize how much you crave genuine connection. You want to feel with others, not just about them. But the habit is hard to break. You've spent years training your nervous system to put logic first, to analyze every gesture for intent, to never let yourself be blindsided by the unpredictable flood of raw emotion. You're not heartless. You're guarded, hyper-attuned to every cue, but never quite letting yourself step into the shared pool of feeling. Psychology calls this emotional detachment or hypervigilance. Neurobiology would say your amygdala is working overtime, scanning for threat, and your prefrontal cortex is filtering every feeling into a spreadsheet of possible outcomes. It's self-protection, but it also becomes self-isolation. You're the person everyone trusts to read the room, to sense when something's off, to spot the lie no one else sees. But when it comes to true intimacy, you struggle. You know what people are feeling before they do, but you don't feel it with them. It's a double-edged sword. In business, law, even therapy, this skill can be invaluable. It allows you to predict moves, avoid traps, steer conversations where you want them to go. You're rarely surprised, rarely at a loss for what comes next. But in friendship, in love, in family, the override becomes a barrier. People sense you're not fully present. They feel the distance, even if they can't name it. They appreciate your insight, but long for your empathy. Sometimes, you wish you could just turn it off. Let yourself be swept up in someone else's joy or pain, instead of reading it like lines of code. But every adaptation comes from somewhere. Maybe your childhood taught you to scan for danger, to read microaggressions before they exploded. Maybe you learned, again and again, that emotions unfiltered led to chaos, and so you built this override. It's not your fault. It's a survival mechanism, a gift and a curse. So, what do you do with it? The first step is noticing it, catching yourself in the act of decoding instead of feeling. In a conversation, try to drop the analysis just for a moment. Notice the feeling in your own body, not just the flickers in theirs. Risk being present, even if it means being vulnerable to their pain or joy. You may not always succeed, but the effort matters. There's nothing wrong with being perceptive. The world needs people who can see the unspoken, spot the lie, predict the turn. But don't forget to let yourself be surprised sometimes. Let your empathy breathe, even if just for a heartbeat. The override will always be there, ready to protect you when you need it. But sometimes, the greatest courage is in letting yourself feel messy, unpredictable, human, right alongside the people you're so good at reading. Because at the end of the day, microexpressions are only part of the story. The rest is found not in what you see on someone else's face, but in what you're willing to feel in your own. And sometimes, the most profound connection comes when you stop reading the code and start sharing the feeling. Value output calibration. Somewhere along the way, you start measuring what used to be immeasurable. You begin to see love, trust, kindness, not as free-flowing streams, but as investments with expected returns. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe the world shaped you this way, trained your heart to run like an accountant's ledger. But now, every act of warmth, every smile, every confession passes through a mental cost-benefit analysis before it ever escapes your lips. This is value output calibration, the quiet, rational machinery that decides who gets your energy and who gets shut out. At first, it doesn't seem like a conscious process. You just notice over time that you give less to the people who give less back. You pull your warmth like a plug, watch the lights dim, the factory floor of your empathy shutting down one section at a time. Someone asks for trust, but you remember the last time it was broken. So you hesitate. Someone reaches for your kindness, but you count the times your kindness was met with silence or scorn, and you retract. The ROI isn't there, so the system powers down. It's not that you become cold, it's that you become efficient. There's only so much you can pour out before the well runs dry, and you've learned that not every field is worth watering. Your heart is not a charity, it's a business now, lean and measured. You weigh every offer, every request, every gesture, against a scale that's invisible to everyone but you. Consider a friend who always takes, never gives. Maybe you used to stay up late listening to their problems, drop what you were doing just to help, forgive their missed calls and broken promises. But after a while, you start to notice. The help flows one way. Your kindness produces nothing. No gratitude, no change, not even the illusion of mutuality. So you recalibrate. The next time they call, you let it ring. Your warmth is no longer a default setting. It's a calculated expenditure. Or think of love. Maybe you once believed love was unconditional, infinite. You gave and gave, hoping to fill the emptiness in someone else, trusting that your sacrifice would be its own reward. But over time, you noticed the emptiness never changed. The love you gave became expected, not cherished. The return on investment, real connection, mutual support, a feeling of being seen, dropped to zero. So the machine of your heart, trained by disappointment, shuts down that assembly line. You give less or nothing at all. This isn't just about bitterness. It's about survival. You realize, painfully, that energy spent on low ROI relationships is energy stolen from the rest of your life. If you keep giving where nothing grows, you're left depleted. You see others thriving. People who say no, people who set boundaries, people whose love is met with love in return. You start to wonder if maybe calibration isn't just smart. It's necessary. The shift is subtle, but total. You become attuned to feedback loops. When your kindness creates real value, trust, laughter, healing, you give more. When your vulnerability is met with reciprocation, you deepen the connection. But when your efforts fall flat, when your generosity is met with apathy or exploitation, your system records the data. Each disappointment is a minus on the balance sheet. Each betrayal is a line item loss. Over time, the spreadsheet of your soul fills with quiet warnings. Be careful here, invest less there, shut down production in that direction entirely. Sometimes, people notice. They say you've changed, become distant, hard, transactional. Maybe they're right, but they never see the algorithm behind your new behavior. They never see the years of one-sided effort, the invisible losses that forced you to optimize your output. They never count the times you gave everything and received nothing. All they see is the factory shutting down, the lights going off, the warmth that used to flood the room now rationed, metered, precise. This calibration doesn't just protect you from pain, it protects you from regret. When you give only where value flows both ways, you build something sustainable. Relationships become partnerships, not dependencies. Love becomes a circuit, not a drain. Trust becomes a shared resource, not a gamble. You stop expecting fruit from barren soil. You plant elsewhere, where the sun reaches both ways. But the cost of this way of living is real. Sometimes, you miss the reckless generosity you once had. You remember what it felt like to give without counting, to love without fearing loss, to trust before the world taught you caution. Sometimes, you worry that in becoming efficient, you've also become mechanical. You wonder if you're missing out on a deeper joy, the kind that only comes from risking everything, even when the ROI is unknown. Yet, there's a relief too, a feeling of coming home to yourself, of finally honoring the limits you denied for too long. You watch as your life becomes clearer, lighter. Toxic ties dissolve. Your time, your love, your kindness, each is an asset now, invested with care, growing where it's nourished, protected where it's not. You start to see the same pattern everywhere. At work, you learn to say no to tasks that burn you out for little reward. You give your best only to projects and people who value your effort. In family, you draw lines, refuse to play roles that exhaust you for the benefit of others who never notice. In friendship, you pour yourself into those rare, beautiful connections that feed you too. Over time, your calibration becomes almost instinctive. You don't have to think about it. When someone asks for your time, your mind does the math before your mouth can answer. Is there value here? Will my energy return in kindness, respect, love? Or is this another black hole, another endless drain? The decisions become easier. The boundaries become stronger. There's a final stage to this process, a paradoxical one. As you become more selective, your warmth grows richer, more vibrant. Because you're no longer scattered, no longer bled dry by low-value exchanges, you can show up more fully for the people and projects that truly matter. Your factory is smaller now, but everything it produces is gold. Your kindness is rare, but it's real. Your trust is guarded, but it's deep. Your love, when given, is a force that transforms because it's been earned. Not everyone will understand. Some will call you cold, transactional, heartless. They'll remember the old you, the one who gave without thinking and mourn what's changed. But you know better. You know that calibration is the cost of survival in a world that too often consumes without giving back. You know that protecting your output is the only way to keep creating, to keep loving, to keep trusting, without losing yourself in the process. And maybe, someday, you'll find someone who calibrates too. Someone who understands that love isn't a transaction, but a shared investment. Someone whose kindness multiplies yours, whose trust builds a foundation instead of a gamble. With them, you might find a new kind of abundance, the kind that needs no calculation, because the ROI is infinite and the factory never closes. Until then, you calibrate, you measure, you choose, and in those choices you rediscover the worth of your own warmth, the value of your own heart, and the rare, unmeasurable gift of being truly seen, not for what you give, but for what you are. Attachment prevention, routine. You know the pattern even if you never named it. There's a moment, always early, when you meet someone new and feel that flicker of possibility, of excitement, of what could be. It doesn't matter if it's a friendship, a romance, a new teammate, or just a stranger with an open smile. For a split second, hope wants to bloom. Then, the old machinery starts up. You feel it in your chest, that dull warning. Don't get close. Don't risk it. Instead, you shift gears and start the routine, the one you've spent years perfecting. You scan for flaws, catalog every imperfection, predict every way they could one day let you down. It's not cruelty. It's not cynicism. It's your version of survival. You remember how it started. Maybe it's childhood, where trusting someone meant being let down. Maybe it's those friendships that soured, the loves that turned sharp, the family that taught you distance was safer than hope. Maybe it's not a single wound, but 1,000 small betrayals, each one carving its own warning into the soft parts of you. So you learned. If you can predict disappointment, you can dodge pain. If you spot the flaw first, you can armor yourself. If you rationalize all the ways this person could break you, you can slip away before it happens. You become a master of preemption, a strategist who plays the endgame before the game even begins. The routine isn't obvious at first. Maybe you tell yourself it's realism, or discernment, or healthy skepticism. You look for red flags. You analyze patterns. You notice the way they hesitate before answering, or the nervous laugh when you ask about their past, or how they look away when you mention your dreams. Each detail, harmless in isolation, is quietly added to a mental list. You collect evidence, not to know them better, but to build your exit strategy. You remind yourself, attachment is a liability. The closer you get, the deeper the eventual wound. So you hold back. You see the flaws, and you let them build a wall. Sometimes the wall goes up so fast, you don't even notice you've locked yourself out. It plays out in daily life in 1,000 subtle ways. Maybe a friend offers support, and instead of leaning in, you remember the last time someone promised and vanished. Maybe a partner tries to get closer, and you suddenly focus on their impatience, their forgetfulness, that one offhand comment from weeks ago. You replay it, dissect it, magnify it. See, you tell yourself, this is why I shouldn't get close. The mind is brilliant at finding reasons. Once you decide you need to protect yourself, every flaw becomes a sign. Every sign becomes a verdict. Sometimes you're so skilled, the other person never stands a chance. They're disqualified in your mind before they've even proven themselves. You point out their mistakes, maybe only to yourself, maybe out loud, maybe in little jokes that sting more than they should. You say you're just being honest, but what you're really doing is building distance. Because as long as you see them as flawed, as long as you're convinced they'll let you down, you never have to risk truly caring. You can leave at any moment and tell yourself you saw it coming. You become the expert in detachment. People might even envy you for how unbothered you seem. Nothing gets to you, they say, as if it's a superpower. You shrug, but inside you know the cost. The loneliness that creeps in late at night, the longing for a bond that never forms, the ache of wanting to be known but never letting anyone close enough. You're safe, but you're starved. You live behind glass, watching connection but never stepping into the warmth. It's not just personal relationships. It spills into everything. At work, you see the flaws in every new leader, every team, every project. So you stay on the edge, never committing. You're the first to predict failure, the last to trust a vision. You become known for your skepticism, maybe even your insight, but nobody knows how much you crave to belong, to invest, to lose yourself in something bigger than your own caution. You tell yourself stories to make it easier. I'm just protecting myself. I'm too smart to get fooled. I see things others miss. There's truth in it. Experience is a kind of wisdom, but sometimes wisdom becomes a cage. The smarter you get at predicting pain, the less you ever risk joy. You convince yourself it's better this way. No betrayal, no heartbreak, no disappointment. But the absence of pain is not the same as the presence of happiness. It's just numbness. Let's look at an example. Maybe you meet someone new, and there's instant chemistry. They're funny, attentive, thoughtful. But then, a crack. A joke that lands wrong, a missed message, a story that doesn't line up. Most people would shrug, but your mind zooms in, highlights it in red, and files it away as evidence. You watch for the next crack and the next. Soon all you see are the fractures. Attachment feels like danger, so you rationalize your exit. You say it's about standards, but deep down, it's about fear. Or maybe you finally let someone in. Just a little. You begin to care, maybe more than you want to admit. But as soon as you notice your own vulnerability, you panic. You start hunting for reasons to pull back. You fixate on their flaws, exaggerate them in your mind, retell yourself the story of how it will all fall apart. You convince yourself to leave, even if part of you aches to stay. The relief is immediate. You're safe again. But the emptiness lingers, and you wonder why it always ends this way. Sometimes, you see this routine in others. You spot the friend who never commits, the partner who always finds an excuse, the colleague who never buys in. You recognize the signs because you live them. Maybe you want to tell them to stop, to risk it, to let someone matter. But you know how terrifying that is. You know the voice that whispers, if you never attach, you can never be abandoned. It's not logical. It's survival. But here's the secret you keep from yourself. Every time you preempt attachment by rationalizing flaws, you're not just protecting yourself from pain. You're protecting yourself from growth, from healing, from the raw aliveness that only connection brings. Real relationships are always imperfect. People disappoint. Mistakes happen. But so do forgiveness, repair, transformation. If you never let anyone close, you never get to witness the magic of surviving disappointment and finding deeper trust on the other side. There's a different kind of strength, the kind that lets you see someone's flaws and choose to care anyway, to risk being hurt, knowing that you will survive, to let go of the fantasy of certainty and let yourself be changed by another person, even if it means pain. The irony is that your attempts to preempt heartbreak only guarantee another kind of heartbreak, the heartbreak of never being truly known. You might tell yourself, but I've been hurt before, I can't do it again. And that's true. Past wounds shape us, but they can also freeze us in place, trap us in a loop where the only thing we ever experience is the echo of old disappointments. The challenge is to notice the routine, to catch yourself in the act of building distance, and to ask, what if I stayed? What if I accepted imperfection? What if I risked being hurt and found something deeper instead? Maybe you start with one person, one moment. You notice their flaw, and instead of running, you sit with it. You remember your own flaws, the ways you've disappointed others. You allow for humanity, not perfection. You give connection a chance to grow. Maybe it's scary. Maybe it hurts. Maybe you get burned. But maybe, for the first time, you feel what it means to belong. Because in the end, the attachment prevention routine is just another shield, one you built when you needed it. But you're not who you were. You can risk more now. You can let someone in, flaws and all. You can rewrite the story, not by avoiding pain, but by meeting it with openness, honesty, and the courage to stay. The reward isn't certainty, it's realness. The gift isn't safety, it's love, messy and breathtaking, the only thing that ever makes life worth living. Logical loop, lockdown. Sometimes you wake up and feel something heavy. A sadness, a twist of anxiety, an echo of anger you can't quite name. You pause, searching for the reason. Maybe there's no obvious trigger. So, you interrogate the feeling as if it's a witness under a spotlight. What's your purpose? What's your use? If the answer doesn't come quickly, if the feeling can't prove its worth, you dismiss it. You treat emotion like a line of buggy code in the software of your mind. That's the logic loop, lockdown. A mental firewall, a refusal to feel what can't be justified by outcome or purpose. You weren't always this way. As a child, emotions flowed without reason or restriction. Joy was its own answer. Sadness was a storm that passed through you. Anger erupted and faded. But somewhere along the line, maybe when you first got hurt, or first realized the world could punish you for feeling too much, you started building walls. You learned that some emotions win praise, while others are treated like defects to be patched out. You watched adults stifle tears, bury rage, force smiles when the world expected them. You learned the code of survival. Feelings are allowed if, and only if, they serve a function. Now, every time an inconvenient feeling rises, the loop begins. You analyze. You rationalize. You ask, what good does this do me? If you can't find a reason, you discard the emotion, banish it like a virus. You believe you're making yourself efficient, rational, strong. You become your own systems engineer, debugging the human out of your humanity. It happens in small ways. You feel lonely but decide it's pointless, so you bury yourself in work. You feel jealous, but since it won't change anything, you label it childish and move on. A wave of fear hits. If it's not actionable, you suppress it. Emotions become data points, run through a filter of utility. Anything that can't be converted to productivity, safety, or some clear benefit is marked for deletion. Think about the times you forced yourself to stay calm in the face of injustice because getting angry won't help, or the moments you refused to mourn a loss, convincing yourself that grief is just wasted energy, or when joy wells up unexpectedly but you tamp it down, worried it's unprofessional or immature. The loop tightens. The algorithm of your mind rewards logic, banishes the rest. There's a strange kind of pride in it at first. You become the person who never loses composure, never gets rattled. You're admired for your cool head, your rational responses, your ability to power through when others break down. You feel a step ahead, armored against chaos. The world, after all, often respects those who can keep their emotions in check. But over time, the lockdown has a cost. You start to notice a thinning of experience, a dulling of color in your days. The highs are less high, the lows less sharp, but everything becomes a little less alive. You laugh, but it's quieter. You love, but it's safer. You hurt, but you don't let it sink in. When pain does breach the firewall, when some event is so overwhelming you can't logic your way out, it comes as a shock, a system crash. You don't know how to handle feelings that refuse to be functional. You see it in the person who never lets themselves cry, even at funerals. In the friend who can't celebrate a victory because joy feels unproductive. In the parent who tells a grieving child, be strong, instead of holding them through the storm. The logic loop tightens around every relationship, every conversation, until even love is subjected to analysis. What's the point? Becomes the motto, and anything that can't answer is pushed aside. The science of emotion tells us something different. Feelings aren't random glitches. They're ancient, adaptive signals, wired deep into our brains by millions of years of survival. Fear warns us of danger before our rational mind can catch up. Grief honors what was lost, compelling us to reach for connection. Anger can fuel action, drive justice, or reveal boundaries. Even pointless sadness can help us process change, rest, and heal. When you discard emotions simply because they don't serve an immediate function, you cut yourself off from a deeper intelligence. There's an irony here. The more you lock down your emotions, the more likely they are to resurface in distorted ways. Suppressed sadness becomes numbness or fatigue. Denied anger morphs into passive aggression or unexplained anxiety. Refused joy turns into boredom. You debug your feelings only to introduce subtler, harder to fix bugs in the system of your life. But there's a deeper layer to the lockdown. the existential discomfort of not knowing why you feel what you feel. Sometimes, the function of emotion isn't obvious. Sometimes, feelings come as echoes from old wounds, signals from hidden parts of yourself, reminders that you are more than a machine built for efficiency. The logical loop tries to force clarity, but some truths aren't logical. Some healing only happens when you let the emotion exist, without demanding it prove its worth. Imagine a world where you let every emotion in, just for a moment, without asking it to justify itself. You feel sadness, and you let it linger, even if it's inconvenient. You feel love, and you express it, even if there's no reason for it right now. You allow anger, not as an excuse for harm, but as a message from your boundaries. You let joy bubble up, useless and beautiful, because life is more than productivity. This isn't easy. It runs counter to everything you've been taught about strength, logic, adulthood. The world wants you to be efficient, controlled, always on task. But you are not a system to be debugged. You are a person. Messy, contradictory, alive. Sometimes the greatest act of logic is recognizing the limits of logic itself. Sometimes the most functional thing you can do is sit with a feeling you don't understand. Let it pass through you. Let it teach you. Let it remind you that being human is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. So next time you feel the lockdown tightening, next time you ask, what's the function of this emotion? Pause. Listen, not for an answer, but for the truth behind the feeling. Maybe it has no function. Maybe it's just part of you. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because when you let yourself feel, without explanation, without judgment, you break the loop. You reclaim the full spectrum of your humanity. And that is not a glitch in the system. That is the point of the system. That is what makes you alive. Threat probability. Override. It happens in a split second. A flash of danger. A sudden noise in the dark. A confrontation you didn't see coming. Most people feel the spike of fear, that primitive surge in the chest, the pulse in the neck, the urge to run or fight or freeze. But not you. Somewhere along the line, you rewired yourself. Fear doesn't get to control the system anymore. The old hardware still lights up. Adrenaline floods your veins, your body tenses, your senses sharpen. But instead of being hijacked by panic, your mind slips into calculation, like a machine learning algorithm built to survive. You feel the threat, but you override the terror. You don't feel scared, you feel accurate. Everything slows down, but your thoughts speed up. You scan the scene for variables. Number of exits, proximity of witnesses, potential weapons, line of sight, angles of attack. Each second becomes a data point, each heartbeat a metric. Your emotions don't scream, they inform. You're not blind with fear, you're tuned, dialed in, running risk assessment protocols that cut through noise and fantasy to see the world as it actually is. The person in front of you raises their voice, steps too close. The old you might have flinched, braced for impact, waited for permission to panic. Now, you're already mapping routes out, calculating their probable actions based on posture, tone, facial microexpressions, the risk of escalation, the odds of violence, the cost of every move you could make, all computed and filed away in the space of a breath. Some people think this is courage. It's not, exactly. Courage is what you do when you're scared. What you feel is something else, a cold, crisp clarity, an absence of distortion. You don't drown in what-ifs. You run them. You assign each threat a probability, each possible outcome a percentage. Fight or flight isn't a binary, it's a menu. You scroll through options with clinical detachment. What is the likelihood that this situation ends badly? What's the earliest moment I can safely disengage? Are they armed? Are you? What are the statistical outcomes based on past patterns? While others are ruled by a vague sense of dread, you're ruled by the numbers. This isn't some natural gift. It's an adaptation, a scar grown over years of needing to be ready. Maybe you grew up in a place where threats weren't theoretical. They were real, daily, woven into the fabric of your life. Maybe you've been blindsided before, and you promised yourself you'd never be that vulnerable again. Maybe you just hate the feeling of helplessness, so you trained yourself to convert it into control. Fear still visits you, but you taught it new tricks. Now it powers the simulation instead of the meltdown. The world mistakes your calm for apathy. They see the flat eyes, the measured responses, and think you're cold, disconnected, maybe even reckless. They don't see the calculations happening beneath the surface, the constant scanning, the Bayesian updating, the silent risk matrix you build out of every unpredictable moment. They don't know how much effort it takes to keep your voice even, your hands steady, your mind clear. You're not fearless. You're just unwilling to let emotion outvote information. You remember a time before you learned this skill, a time when fear ruled you, when a sudden shout would jolt you, when arguments left you speechless, when threats made your hands shake. Maybe you froze or you lashed out, or you ran and regretted it later. The regret built up, every mistake a lesson you burned into your memory. Over time, you started tracking the patterns. What was predictable? What was chaos? What was a bluff? And what was real? The fear didn't vanish. It evolved, compressed into algorithms that now run automatically whenever your safety is threatened. You start to see danger everywhere, not because you're paranoid, but because you're trained. The world is full of low probability, high impact events, and you're always running the numbers in the background. Someone new enters the room and your mind tags them. Potential threat, 2%. The air gets tense and the odds rise. 12%, 18%. Most days, nothing happens. But when it does, you're already 10 steps ahead, having built contingency plans for every variable you could imagine. You feel safe not because the world is safe, but because you have replaced blind fear with informed vigilance. This kind of thinking changes you. Relationships feel different. When someone raises their voice in anger, you don't take it personally. You analyze it. Is it real or a tactic? Is there an exit or is this a dead end? You move through the world with a kind of practiced detachment, seeing yourself not as a victim, but as an agent, a player in a live simulation, where the cost of failure is pain, but the reward for accuracy is survival. You are never fully at ease, but you are always ready. But the override comes at a price. There are moments when you wish you could just feel fear, pure and simple. Scream, cry, collapse into the arms of someone else. Let the emotion do what it was designed to do. But you've been running the override protocol for so long that the circuit is hard to break. Even when the threat passes, you're still calculating, still updating probabilities. The adrenaline lingers as a kind of cold static, a reminder that safety is a state you create, not one the world gives you. Some nights, the vigilance keeps you awake, running scenarios you'll never need. But you know the alternative is worse, a life ruled by panic, by helplessness, by not knowing what to do when the odds shift against you. There's a strange satisfaction in being accurate. You catch the bluff. You dodge the real danger. You learn to trust your models, your protocols, the discipline you built out of necessity. Fear becomes less of a saboteur, more of a silent advisor. You let it fuel your accuracy, but never your paralysis. And in a world that loves to romanticize fearlessness, you know the real secret. Being fearless isn't the goal. Being right is. Knowing when to run, when to fight, when to wait, when to surrender. Every threat is just another variable. Every outcome, another data point. So, when the next spike of danger arrives, when the world expects you to freeze or panic, you run the override. You scan, calculate, adapt. You trust your protocols, your instincts sharpened by experience. You are not afraid, not in the old way. You are not reckless, not numb, not frozen. You are accurate. In a world where threat is always possible, that clarity is your edge, your armor, your way through. Precision cut, closure extraction. There are moments when the human heart wants nothing more than closure, a perfect ending, a resolution that feels just right. We crave the last conversation, the answers, the apology, the clean break that finally allows the story to end in peace. But life is rarely so neat. The call never comes. The words left unsaid keep echoing in your head for months, maybe years. The relationship, the friendship, the job, the dream, it's ripped away with ragged edges, unfinished sentences, threads left dangling in the dark. For most people, this is agony. We ache for closure the way a phantom limb aches for a hand that's no longer there. But what if you found another way? What if instead of waiting for closure to arrive from outside, you learn to manufacture it, precision cut and custom fit, extracting the endpoint you need, not from reality, but from your own mind. This is precision-cut closure extraction. It's an adaptation for survivors, people who've realized that waiting for closure is a game rigged against them. Maybe you've spent nights obsessing over an unanswered message, replaying every scene, desperate for a final explanation that never arrives. Maybe you waited for a loved one to say why they left, or for a boss to admit why you were let go, or for an old friend to explain why they vanished from your life. But closure, you discovered, is often a myth, an idealized exit that only happens in movies. The real world is full of loose ends, dropped calls, ghosts. So you start to build closure on your own terms, cutting clean edges from the chaos, extracting emotional endpoints from the wreckage, as methodically as a surgeon, as logically as a mathematician. Imagine this. You're blindsided by a breakup. The relationship ends with no warning, no chance for a real goodbye. The person you thought you knew is suddenly unreachable. A number blocked, messages ignored, history erased. The pain is sharp, but the lack of closure is a deeper, duller ache, stretching into every empty day. You could wait for answers, could stalk their social media, could lose yourself in endless speculation. But instead, you perform a kind of mental surgery. You gather the data, the red flags you ignored, the last conversation, the shift in tone, the silent disappointments. You run the numbers like a proof, reach your own conclusion, and declare the problem solved. You don't need their explanation. You extract the endpoint yourself and file it away. The wound doesn't disappear, but at least it stops bleeding. Or maybe you lose a job abruptly. No warning, no exit interview, just a cold email or a one-sentence call. Your mind races for reasons. Was it something you said? Did you make a fatal mistake? Did you trust the wrong person? The need for closure is primal. You want to understand, to rewrite the story so it makes sense. But the company has already moved on. The silence is absolute. So, you simulate closure. You review the last 6 months, reconstruct the timeline, decide on the most probable scenario, and treat it as fact. You don't need confirmation. Your mind closes the loop, precise and clean, so you can focus on what comes next. For some, this tactic starts as self-preservation. It's about not letting yourself rot in limbo, not letting your story get hijacked by someone else's refusal to finish what they started. Over time, it becomes an art, an emotional skill set as real as any technical expertise. You learn to spot the moment when waiting for closure is just another form of self-harm. You decide, enough. I will end this myself. I will give myself permission to move on, even if the universe refuses to give me the final page. The process isn't about denial. It's not pretending you're unaffected or erasing the past. It's about treating your own mind like a craftsman treats a stone, carving out a shape where nature left only rough edges. You recognize the patterns, the evidence, the probabilities, and you create an emotional story that is good enough. Not perfect, not final, but sufficient. Just like a mathematical proof, clean, logical, internally consistent. The facts don't have to be all there. You fill in the gaps with reason, not fantasy, and declare the chapter closed. It might sound cold, even mechanical, but the truth is, it takes immense courage, because it means giving up the fantasy that closure will come as a gift. It means accepting that the world owes you nothing. No explanations, no apologies, no neat endings. It means stepping out of the victim's waiting room and into the author's chair, where you write your own last lines. It's a skill forged in heartbreak, in disappointment, in years of unresolved stories. But once you master it, you realize you are no longer trapped by anyone else's silence. You are free. Some people might accuse you of being detached, unemotional, even ruthless. They might see your ability to move on without real closure as proof you never cared. But you know the truth. You felt the agony of waiting, the self-destruction of living in suspended animation. You know how much it costs to let an open wound dictate your present. Precision-cut closure extraction isn't about coldness. It's about reclaiming agency, about deciding that your story is allowed to have an endpoint, even when reality refuses to provide one. But the tactic isn't without risks. Sometimes, you might close a chapter too soon, missing out on genuine reconciliation or growth. Sometimes, you might mistake self-protection for healing, cutting away not just the pain, but also the meaning. The challenge is to balance the need for closure with the humility to remain open open to new evidence, open to new understanding, open to the possibility that some stories don't end. They just transform. Yet, in a world full of ambiguity, this tactic is a kind of superpower. It lets you survive losses that would otherwise consume you. It lets you say, I may not have all the answers, but I have enough to let go. It gives you back the days and nights you would have lost to rumination, to regret, to the endless loop of what-ifs. You become more adaptable, more resilient, less afraid of endings because you know you can craft your own. Picture the alternative, a life spent endlessly replaying old wounds, waiting for the perfect goodbye, the closure that never arrives. You know that pain. You've lived it. But now you have a different path. When someone leaves without explanation, when a chapter ends with the jagged edges, you run your internal proof, extract your own closure, and move forward. The story is yours again. So the next time you find yourself reaching for closure that isn't coming, remember this. You have the power to generate your own emotional endpoints. You don't need permission to move on. The skill of precision-cut closure extraction isn't about not caring. It's about caring enough for yourself to give yourself an ending, even when the world denies you one. Because life is not a novel with tidy chapters and satisfying conclusions. It's a series of messy, unpredictable stories. But if you can cut your own endpoints, you can survive anything. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find more beginnings waiting, just beyond the lines you dared to draw yourself. Historical parallel deconstruction. Sometimes, in the quiet after heartbreak, your mind becomes an historian. Instead of nursing your wounds with empty reassurances or frantic distractions, you retreat into a deeper layer, where your private grief is mapped onto the grand narratives of the past. Your pain stops feeling unique. It becomes a single episode in the epic story of collapse, decay, and ruin that's played out 1,000 times in empires, in cities, in the crumbling bones of civilizations that no longer exist. You stop being just a person in pain and start being the last emperor in a dying Rome, the smoldering ashes after a long siege, a remnant of something once mighty now left to the ghosts. It begins with the metaphors. Your heartbreak isn't just heartbreak. It's a lost city, abandoned to weeds. It's the slow unraveling of a once great dynasty, a treaty broken, a wall breached by enemies who once claimed to be friends. You find yourself reading about the fall of Constantinople and thinking, yes, I know this feeling, the sense that the walls were strong until the betrayal came from within. You think of Carthage, once proud and indomitable, razed to the ground by powers it underestimated. Every failure of love, every crack in trust, is another siege engine rolling up to your gates. This is the strange power of historical parallel deconstruction. The ability to analyze your sorrow not as an isolated misfortune, but as part of a cycle as old as humanity itself. Instead of saying, why me? You say, of course. Empires fall, alliances break, cities burn. Why should your own life be exempt? The collapse of your heart becomes a minor footnote in the story of all collapses, all defeats. There's something both comforting and terrifying in that realization. You're not alone, but you're also not special. Your pain is real, but it's also a statistical inevitability, just one more pattern in the endless churn of loss and renewal. You remember the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the loss of knowledge, the sense of irretrievable damage. You think of the Titanic, hailed as unsinkable, shattered by what seemed a minor wound. Every time you replay the moment your trust was broken, you see the first breach in the hull, the water rising slowly, then all at once. There's no going back. The archives are gone. The ship is doomed. Your heartbreak borrows the vocabulary of historical ruin. You call yourself the survivor of a disaster, a refugee from a war that no one else can see. Sometimes you compare the people who hurt you to tyrants, to traitors, to figures from the darker pages of history. The lover who lied is Brutus to your Caesar. The friend who vanished is a barbarian at the gates. The partner who let you down is a failed statesman, watching their kingdom slip through their fingers. You see your own choices in the light of history's mistakes. The times you trusted too soon, ignored warning signs, made peace when you should have prepared for battle. You become your own historian, your own analyst, dissecting the fall with a forensic detail. Was it the slow erosion of faith, or one decisive betrayal that toppled the structure? Was it greed, pride, overreach, or just the inevitability of entropy? In this way, your grief becomes less chaotic. It takes on shape and sequence. There's an order to ruin. There are lessons in every collapse. You stop hating yourself for falling. You start charting the timeline of your heartbreak, noting the omens and early cracks the way scholars map the years before Rome's decline. You become less a victim and more a chronicler, less a sufferer and more a student of decay. You start seeing the patterns everywhere. You recognize the symptoms of coming collapse, the small lies, the shifting alliances, the loss of shared purpose, the way conversations grow tense and diplomatic, like peace talks before a war, the way you hide your true feelings, storing up grievances like a city hoarding grain before a siege. When the end finally comes, it's almost a relief. You already read the story. You know what comes next. Devastation, then scavenging, then, maybe, slow, stubborn rebirth. But there's a danger in this too. When you filter your pain through the lens of history, you risk distancing yourself from it. Your heartbreak becomes abstract, a case study. You narrate your own suffering with clinical detachment, useful for survival, but cold in the end. It's possible to get so good at drawing parallels that you forget the original wound, the actual bleeding beneath the armor of metaphor. You stop letting yourself feel fully and become just another scribe, endlessly recording, never recovering. And yet, there's power in the parallel. By naming your pain as part of a larger cycle, you reclaim a kind of agency. If empires can rise again, if cities can be rebuilt on ruins, maybe you too can start over. If Rome's ashes became the seedbed for new civilizations, maybe your grief is not the end, but a transition. You study how people survived collapse, not just endured, but adapted. You borrow their tactics, their courage. You learn that rebuilding isn't about forgetting what was lost, but about weaving the memory of collapse into the foundation of what comes next. Historical parallel deconstruction lets you step back, see yourself as a moment in a longer story. You're not the first to suffer, and you won't be the last. The scale of your heartbreak shrinks and expands. It feels less like a personal failure, more like weather, more like the movement of tectonic plates. Your pain is a continent drifting, a river rerouted. In time, you realize the cycle never really ends. Collapse, decay, renewal. The same dance over centuries and over lifetimes. So the next time you feel the edges of your world eroding, you reach for your metaphors. You read about Troy, about Pompeii, about kingdoms leveled and rebuilt. You remember that every ruin was once a home, every end a new beginning. In that way, history keeps you company. You become less afraid of the fall, more curious about what might grow from the rubble. Your heartbreak isn't smaller, but it is finally survivable. And that makes all the difference. Delayed grief simulation. Somewhere in the background of your mind, there's a calendar with a single entry that never arrives. Maybe you lost someone or something, or some former version of yourself that mattered more than you dared to admit. The world tells you grief is a storm, violent but brief, cathartic, even necessary. But what if, instead of crashing through you, grief quietly negotiates for a later time slot? You promise yourself, not now, I'll feel it later. You mark the date on a psychological calendar, certain you'll return to it. But the hour never comes. The alarm is always set. But the clock never rings. This is the architecture of the delayed grief simulation. The pattern isn't rare. In fact, it's everywhere, disguised as strength, busyness, or even self-control. Something shakes your world. A death, a breakup, a devastating failure, a dream dissolved, and your instinct is to keep going. You can't fall apart. You tell yourself, I'll handle this when I have the time, when the world stops spinning, when I'm safe. You might even schedule it, after the semester ends, after the project's delivered, after the kids are asleep, after, always after. It feels responsible, even noble. The world needs you functional. You have responsibilities, people to care for, bills to pay, so you push it down, hide it under routines and obligations. You construct a simulation. You picture a future day when you'll finally give in, let yourself fall to pieces, mourn what's gone. But that day is always a moving target. The simulation keeps you safe. At least, that's how it feels. But what really happens inside you when you delay grief? At first, there's relief. You can move, work, perform. No one sees you bleed. The people who depend on you get what they need. On the surface, you're even praised for your composure. So strong, they say, so together. But beneath it, your grief is not gone. It's simply frozen in time, suspended in the simulation you've designed. The wound doesn't close, it just stops screaming. Sometimes you sense the truth in your body. You catch yourself sighing for no reason. Your chest is heavy. Your jaw clenched. Sleep won't come. The world blurs at the edges. Laughter feels distant. Music doesn't hit the same. You notice yourself snapping at people, forgetting things, misplacing your keys, zoning out in conversations. It's as if part of your mind is forever standing at the edge of a dark room, waiting for the right moment to open the door. Maybe you distract yourself with work. Maybe you bury yourself in other people's problems, so you don't have to feel your own. You might fill every hour. Meetings, chores, endless scrolling. You keep busy, you keep moving, and you convince yourself it's healthy. But time doesn't heal wounds you refuse to touch. Grief waits. Sometimes it waits years. Let's take a closer example. Imagine you lose someone close to you, parent, partner, friend. In the first days, you're too overwhelmed to process it, so you focus on logistics. You organize the funeral, handle the paperwork, help everyone else get through. Each night, you promise yourself you'll grieve when the noise settles. But the noise never settles. There's always another thing to do. Months pass, and you realize you've never truly cried for them. You think about scheduling time to sit with your sorrow, but every time you try, something gets in the way. A work deadline, a family emergency, even a favorite show you'd rather binge than break. Or maybe the loss is less visible. Maybe it's a job you poured your soul into, a relationship that ended quietly, a dream you quietly outgrew. People expect you to bounce back. You expect yourself to bounce back. You tell yourself, I'll deal with it when I have time. But the simulation becomes your reality. Grief is always next on your to-do list, never now. Sometimes you sense the simulation breaking down. Out of nowhere, a memory knocks the air from your lungs. A song, a scent, an offhand comment, and suddenly the pain surges, unbidden, inconvenient, unwanted. You panic, push it down, reschedule it again. Not now, you whisper, not here. Your body listens, but your soul keeps the tally. Every deferred sorrow becomes another ghost in the hallway, waiting for you to finally come home. There's a dark genius to the delayed grief simulation. It lets you function. You get to be the reliable one, the strong one, the one who doesn't fall apart. You earn the world's respect, or at least avoid its pity. But there is a cost. You live in a kind of emotional debt. The longer you delay, the more interest accrues. Grief denied is never grief erased. It seeps into other places, into anxiety, into numbness, into a vague sense that something essential is missing. You laugh, but it's thinner. You love, but there's a wall. You move through your life, but something inside you is still standing in the ruins. Sometimes you see someone who never delayed their grief. Maybe they fell apart in public. Maybe they wept, screamed, collapsed. You envy their freedom even as you judge it. They seem reckless, out of control. But in quiet moments, you sense they're lighter for it. They let the storm hit. They bled, but then they healed. You wonder what it would be like to stop simulating, to feel the full weight, to finally let go, but you are terrified. What if grief drowns you? What if you never get back up? What if the world falls apart while you are down? You bargain with yourself. A little more time, a little more distance. You believe that someday the conditions will be right. Someday you'll have the privacy, the safety, the energy to feel it all. But someday never comes. Grief is patient. It waits for you. Maybe you see it in your relationships. You find it hard to connect, hard to trust, hard to invest in joy. There's a numbness you can't explain. You chase stimulation, food, sex, novelty, work, but nothing fills the emptiness. You wonder why everyone else seems more alive, more present, more able to let go. You forget that you've been living with scheduled sorrow for so long, you don't remember what it feels like to really feel. There's another cost. Your delayed grief affects those around you. The people who love you can sense what you hide. They see the ways you shut down, the ways you avoid hard conversations, the way you pull back when things get too real. Sometimes they blame themselves. Sometimes they leave. Delayed grief doesn't just isolate you from your own feelings, it builds walls between you and the people you care about most. And yet, there's always a way back. It starts with noticing the simulation for what it is. A clever, painful, protective lie. You mark time to grieve, but the clock never rings. You schedule sorrow as a way of skipping it. The only way out is through. Sometimes it's as simple and as impossible as stopping. Sitting with the ache, letting the tears come, admitting that you're not okay. Sometimes it takes help, a friend, a therapist, a quiet hour with no distractions. Sometimes it takes breaking down, letting the wave hit, surrendering to the storm you've tried so hard to outrun. Grief, once allowed, is rarely as endless as you feared. It comes in waves. It hurts. Then it softens. It strips away your illusions, then gives you back your own heart. When you finally let yourself grieve, you begin to remember, not just what you lost, but what you loved. The pain becomes part of you, but so does the love, the memory, the meaning. You find yourself more present, more alive, more capable of joy. The simulation never truly ends. There will always be temptations to delay, to defer, to escape. But now you know the cost. You know that scheduling sorrow is just a way to skip it forever. You know that grief, felt fully, lived honestly, is the only way to become whole again. The clock may never ring on its own. Sometimes you have to set it yourself. Sometimes you have to decide that now is the only time you'll ever have, that the only way out of pain is straight through its center, that life, in all its messy, raw, and painful glory, is waiting for you on the other side. Compassion, inversion, reflex. Sometimes you catch yourself caring, almost instinctively. You see someone suffering, someone falling apart, someone's life coming undone at the seams. For a moment, a wave of sympathy rises. You want to help. You want to comfort. You want to believe you're witnessing a tragedy that's unfair, that deserves a gentle hand. But then, almost as quickly, a switch flips inside you. The warmth drains out. Instead of feeling their pain, you start breaking down their decisions, retracing every step that brought them here, as if you're running a cold calculation. Compassion is replaced by analysis, then by judgment, and finally, by something that feels almost like contempt. Their pain no longer feels tragic. It feels inevitable, algorithmic, earned. That's the compassion inversion reflex. You didn't choose this pattern, but it grows inside you like a defense mechanism, a way to keep the messiness of other people's pain at a safe distance. The world is full of suffering, and sometimes it's easier to believe that everyone gets exactly what they deserve. That way, you don't have to feel so much, don't have to grieve every story, don't have to open your own heart to the possibility that fate is random, and pain can happen to anyone, including you. It might start with something small. Maybe you hear about a coworker who lost their job. At first, you feel sorry for them. You remember the anxiety of uncertainty, the shame of failure. But then the story unspools, and you start dissecting it. Did they really work as hard as they could? Did they speak up enough in meetings? Were they ever really a team player? In the silence of your own mind, you flip through their choices like a case file. Suddenly, your pity is tinged with a kind of forensic distance. You stop feeling sorry and start feeling superior. Or maybe it's a friend who's going through a breakup. They're heartbroken, devastated, calling you late at night just to hear a kind voice. At first, you ache for them, remembering your own lonely nights, but the longer you listen, the more your mind turns inward. Did they ignore red flags? Did they settle for less? Were they really honest about what they needed? Compassion starts to curdle into a kind of cold satisfaction. If their pain is the sum of their choices, maybe you don't have to feel as much. Maybe you're safer, smarter, less vulnerable. It's everywhere in society. The homeless man on the street, the single parent struggling to get by, the student who fails out of school. At first, you feel the ache of shared humanity, but then you ask yourself, what did they do wrong? Where did they fail to try hard enough? Which bad choices sealed their fate? Sympathy withers. Blame blooms. The algorithm runs. Input, output, result. This isn't just a personal quirk. It's wired into our culture. We're taught that success and failure are always earned, that life is a perfect meritocracy. That way, you don't have to be afraid of randomness. You tell yourself, if I make the right choices, I'll be safe. If someone else is suffering, it must be because they chose wrong. This story comforts you until it's your turn to fall. Sometimes you recognize what you're doing. You hear yourself say, they brought it on themselves. You feel the chill that comes with that thought. But it's easier than feeling helpless, easier than admitting that life is chaos, that pain visits the careful and the careless alike. It's a reflex, a way to invert compassion and swap it out for analysis, for distance, for safety. But what's the cost of this inversion? Over time, you become more brittle, more isolated. The world starts to look less like a web of shared struggles and more like a scoreboard. You stop reaching out, stop risking kindness, stop allowing yourself to feel the messy, complicated empathy that once came so easily. The pain of others becomes background noise, an endless stream of algorithmic results scrolling past your eyes. You see it in the way people talk about addiction, about poverty, about mental illness. Why didn't they just leave? Why didn't they get help? Why did they let things get so bad? Each question is a brick in the wall that separates you from them. Each dissection of their mistakes is another way to convince yourself it couldn't happen to you, that you're in control. But the truth is always more complicated. You know, deep down, that life is not a tidy equation. Bad things happen to good people. Luck matters, circumstances matter. The choices that look obvious in hindsight are often invisible in the moment. Sometimes, people do everything right and still suffer. Sometimes, the only difference between your comfort and someone else's disaster is one missed phone call, one twist of fate, one moment of weakness. And yet, the reflex persists. It persists because it protects you from feeling too much, from caring until it hurts, from realizing your own fragility. The more you dissect, the less you have to risk being vulnerable. The more you judge, the safer you feel from chaos. But what do you lose in the process? The ability to connect, to offer real comfort, to let someone else's story matter to you. It's not just about other people, it's about yourself too. When your own life unravels, when pain finds you, the compassion inversion reflex turns inward. You audit every choice, every mistake, every sign you should have seen. You withhold kindness from yourself, treating your suffering as a logical outcome, as something you deserve. The reflex that once protected you now isolates you. You feel alone, unloved, judged by your own inner jury. So what's the way out? Maybe it's as simple and as difficult as letting yourself feel. Letting the first instinct of compassion win, just for a moment, before the analysis begins. Let yourself see the whole person, not just the sum of their choices. Let yourself imagine what it's like to be lost, to be overwhelmed, to make a mistake and not know how to fix it. Let yourself be soft, even if the world tells you it's dangerous. Maybe the answer isn't to erase logic or accountability. Maybe the answer is to hold both, to see the choices and the circumstances, the actions and the accidents, the flaws and the luck. To feel compassion first, then to offer insight, not as a verdict, but as a hand reached out across the gap. Life is not an algorithm. Suffering isn't always earned. The story is always bigger than the evidence you can dissect. Sometimes, the most human thing you can do is to let yourself ache for someone else, even if their pain makes no sense, even if you want to look away, even if you know it could be you one day. The compassion inversion reflex is powerful. It's efficient. It's logical. But it will never satisfy the part of you that longs to be seen, to be forgiven, to be loved in spite of your mistakes. When you're tempted to invert, to analyze, to judge, pause. Let yourself care. Let yourself remember that every algorithm breaks down, sooner or later, and that in the end, we're all just trying to find our way back to each other. Peace through detachment. Index. There's a point where you stop chasing connection and start tracking peace. Not the peace they sell you in self-help books, serene, glowing, effortlessly social, but a colder, quieter kind. The kind that sits at the bottom of you, untouched by chaos, immune to praise or blame. You learn, sometimes painfully, that every emotional attachment has a cost, and not all of them are worth paying. So, you start to keep score. You measure, like an accountant in the aftermath of a storm, just how much each burst of feeling is costing you. You call it survival. You call it self-protection. You call it whatever you need to, because for you, peace is no longer a side effect. It's the whole point. You begin by noticing the spikes. Someone you care about disappoints you. Maybe they forget your birthday, or cancel plans again, or let a careless word slip. Once, that would have ruined your day. Now, you watch the graphs in your mind. You see the spike in anxiety, the dip in self-worth, the surge of old insecurities flaring up like a fever. You ask yourself, what is this costing me? Is the connection worth this much peace lost? When the answer is no, you detach. Not with drama, not with fireworks, but with the silent efficiency of someone who's learned the danger of letting other people write the script for their own sanity. You respond politely, but inside, the cord is cut. Your priority is peace. Everything else, every bond, every conversation, every memory, is expendable. At first, it feels like a kind of defeat. Weren't you supposed to fight for your relationships, to invest in others, to hold on even when it hurts? But you remember what it felt like, giving and giving until you were emptied out, trying to fix connections that only frayed further the more you pulled. You remember nights lying awake, replaying arguments, crafting the perfect apology in your head, or imagining ways to be more enough next time. All that effort, and for what? A moment of harmony that never lasted, peace that never felt secure. So, you made the calculation. You started keeping the index. The peace through detachment index isn't about turning cold. It's about self-preservation. Every person in your life becomes a variable. Every interaction and entry in the ledger. When someone's presence spikes your anxiety, drains your energy, or shakes your sense of self, you don't ask what you did wrong. You ask if they belong in your equation. You weigh the pros and cons, the joy they bring, the drama they cause, the steadiness of their love against the chaos of their storms. You don't eliminate everyone at the first sign of trouble. Life is messier than that. But you trust your measurements. When the costs keep climbing, when peace becomes a rare currency, you cash out. You let go. You detach. It changes you. You move through the world less desperate, less hungry for approval. You start to enjoy your own company more than the company of those who cost you too much. Silence becomes soothing, not scary. Solitude becomes a resource, not a punishment. You find peace in the little things, the way the sunlight hits your floor in the morning, the taste of coffee alone, the softness of your own pillow. You don't need validation from every friend, every lover, every colleague. Your peace is not for sale. If someone tries to buy it with guilt, expectation, or need, you don't bargain anymore. You walk away. But there's a shadow side. You notice the distance growing between you and the world. You watch as people call you aloof, unbothered, maybe even heartless. You see relationships fade, invitations dry up, conversations grow polite but shallow. Sometimes you ache for the wild joy of connection, the thrill of being known, the messiness of loving and being loved back. But every time you dip your toe back in, you watch the cost chart spike, and you remember why you built the index in the first place. Your heart has become a sovereign territory, and peace is the border you defend at all costs. You wonder if you're missing something. If all this detachment is just another kind of prison, a life spent in retreat from the very thing that makes living vivid. But then you remember the chaos you left behind. The toxic friends, the unreliable lovers, the family members who weaponized guilt. You remember the years when your peace was so fragile that one text could destroy it. You remind yourself that some connections were never meant to last, and that sometimes letting go is the only way to stop the bleeding. The detachment is not about absence, but about boundaries, about refusing to bleed for people who would never heal you in return. You find a new kind of connection, quieter, but more honest. You choose a few people, maybe just one or two, who don't spike the index. The ones who know how to sit in silence with you, who don't demand that you trade peace for company. You invest there, slowly, cautiously, learning that true connection doesn't cost you your core. You keep the index running, but now it's not a barrier. It's a guide. When someone new enters your life, you watch the numbers. If peace is preserved, you lean in. If the cost gets too high, you pull back. No guilt, no apology. Peace is the only non-negotiable. Some nights, you miss the old chaos. The late-night arguments, the dizzying highs and lows of love, the sense of belonging that came from being so needed, so woven into the lives of others. But, that version of you was always on the edge, never really safe, never really whole. You don't need that anymore. You've built something quieter, something stronger, a life where peace is the foundation, not the accident. So you keep measuring. When the world tells you to feel more, to open up, to let the tides of emotion sweep you away, you remember what that cost you. You remember that your peace is yours, and you'll trade it for nothing. Not love, not belonging, not the fleeting warmth of being understood by people who never really saw you. Your index is your compass. When it spikes, you detach. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because peace, once you find it, is a sanctuary you never let go of again. And in that sanctuary, you find not emptiness, but the rarest kind of freedom. One that is yours and yours alone. Self-emotion audit mode. Imagine looking at your own heart as if it were a hard drive. Every emotion, every surge of anger, every flicker of affection, every ache of guilt, each one tucked away in its own folder, labeled, dated, and sorted for review. There's no chaos, no swirl of feelings flooding your mind, no confusion about what you feel or why. Instead, you operate in self-emotion audit mode. It's clinical, precise, almost mechanical. Something stirs within you, a jolt of resentment, a pang of longing, a flash of shame, and instead of being swept up, you pause. You access the internal dashboard, scan the files, identify what's there. If an emotion seems corrupted, too disruptive, too painful, too unnecessary, you delete it. Instantly. No investigation, no deep dive, no regret. It's gone, erased from your operating system, as if it was never there. This isn't just emotional control, it's emotional management, elevated to an almost algorithmic discipline. The world around you runs on unpredictable, messy feelings. People bursting into tears, lashing out in rage, clinging to regret or wallowing in nostalgia. But you run the audit. You catch the surge before it swamps your senses. You check for value, for utility, for integrity. If a feeling threatens your performance or your stability, you drag it to the trash and hit delete. It sounds cold, maybe even ruthless, but for you, it's not about being heartless. It's about survival. It's about efficiency. It's about not being sabotaged by your own software. Picture a day when something goes wrong at work. A colleague throws you under the bus in front of your team. The flash of anger is instant. For most people, that anger would spill out. Snapped words, gritted teeth, maybe a simmering grudge that lasts for days. But in audit mode, you catch it at the source. Anger detected. You scan for value. Will this help you? Will it move you forward? If the answer is no, if the anger is just noise, just clutter, just another corrupted file, you delete it. You stay calm, your face unreadable, your mind clear. There's no lingering aftertaste. The audit is complete. The problem is gone. Or maybe you're revisiting an old memory, a friendship that ended, a decision you regret. Guilt flickers on the screen. Most people would dwell, replay the scene, analyze every detail, spiral into self-recrimination. Not you. You spot the file, guilt. You check for corruption. Does this feeling have anything to teach you now? Does it serve any purpose? If not, delete. No nostalgia, no sentimentality. The system runs smoother without unnecessary baggage. Even affection gets the audit treatment. Maybe you catch yourself caring for someone you know will never reciprocate. Instead of letting hope grow, you flag the feeling as unproductive. Affection, detected. Value, negative. Potential for pain, high, delete. You move on before heartbreak has a chance to take root. The world is full of advice about feeling your feelings, about sitting with your emotions, about embracing the mess. But self-emotion audit mode is about something else. It's about refusing to let yourself become a slave to feelings that no longer serve you. It's the discipline of running regular scans, identifying what's broken, and clearing the clutter with ruthless precision. It's about not letting one corrupted emotion infect the rest of your system. You become your own IT department, keeping the hardware running clean and efficient. But what does this look like over time? For some, it brings enormous relief. No more drowning in regret or rage. No more emotional hangovers that last for weeks. You become reliable, unshakable, a person who gets things done, who can be trusted to stay cool in a crisis, who doesn't fall apart when the world turns upside down. People might even admire your composure, your apparent invulnerability. They come to you for advice, for support, for solutions, never for drama. Yet, there's a cost to this kind of management. Sometimes, in the rush to delete, you lose something essential. You become so skilled at removing pain, you start deleting joy before it can bloom. You discard affection before it can deepen. You erase regret before you can learn from it. Your emotional landscape grows tidier but emptier, a neat array of files with no wildflowers in between. There are moments when you catch yourself feeling nothing at all, not because you're numb, but because you've gotten so good at clearing out every file that even the beautiful ones don't get a chance to last. It's not that you don't want to feel, it's that you don't want to drown. Maybe you learned this mode after years of chaos, after a childhood spent navigating explosive tempers or manipulative guilt trips, after heartbreak that lingered too long, or trauma that wouldn't fade. Maybe you watched people around you destroyed by emotions they couldn't control, and you promised yourself you'd never be like that. So you built the Audit, this clean, efficient, almost emotionless system of self-regulation. But what happens when you encounter someone who doesn't run the Audit? Someone who feels everything all at once, in technicolor and full volume? Maybe you envy them. Maybe you pity them. Maybe, secretly, you wish you could let go of the Audit, just once, and let yourself feel without scanning for corruption or calculating for risk. But every time you try, the old survival instinct kicks in. The Audit is there to protect you, and it does its job perfectly. Still, there are cracks. Sometimes a feeling slips through. A moment of wonder, a pang of grief, a sudden, unplanned laugh that catches you off guard. And for an instant, you remember what it was like to live without the Audit, to let the mess in, to be swept away by something bigger than logic or utility. Maybe those moments scare you, or maybe they give you hope that the Audit isn't permanent, that beneath all the files and filters, there's still a human being, still capable of being surprised. In the end, self-emotion audit mode is a tool, a survival tactic in a world that punishes emotional vulnerability as much as it rewards emotional discipline. It gives you agency, it gives you peace, but it also asks a price. The key is knowing when to run the Audit, and when to let a corrupted file linger just long enough to see what it might teach you. Because not every emotion that hurts is broken. Not every file that rattles the system needs to be deleted. Sometimes the glitch is where the magic happens. But for you, when life comes fast and hard, you know what to do. The surge comes, the Audit runs, the files are sorted, and the unnecessary ones are erased. No investigation, no regret. The system stays clean, the heart stays safe. And sometimes, that's the only way to keep moving forward in a world that never stops sending new files to your inbox, each one asking if it deserves to stay, or if it's time to disappear with a single, final, perfectly controlled click. Emotional minimalism, protocol. Somewhere in the machinery of modern survival, you learn the art of emotional minimalism. You don't stop feeling, not entirely, but you ration your feelings like water in a desert. There's an internal switch, a protocol you follow every day. Experience just enough emotion to pass as human, to keep the peace, to play your role in the social theater. No more, no less. You sense the pressure to be authentic, to let your heart breathe, but the world has taught you the cost of excess. Too much feeling spills over, drowns reason, draws attention, or worse, exposes you to wounds you can't afford. So you become the careful operator of your own affect, calibrating each response like a dial on a sterile control panel. It's not quite numbness, but it's a calculated restraint. At work, someone shares bad news, and you nod, offer a sympathetic murmur, maybe touch their arm just long enough to prove you're present. Inside, you register their pain, but you let it pass through like data, acknowledged, sorted, filed away. You give exactly what's required, no surplus. If the moment calls for a smile, you supply it. Muscle memory guiding your lips, a flicker in the eyes. But even as you're performing, you can feel the algorithm running behind your gaze. How much is enough? When can you stop? You learn this protocol from experience. Maybe it started in childhood, when the people around you made it clear that too much emotion was unsafe. Crying was met with scorn, anger with punishment, joy with suspicion. You became an expert at the microdose. You wept in silence, smiled behind closed doors, rationed your outbursts to the moments when no one was watching. Later, you refine the method, perfecting the art of just enough. You become fluent in small talk, in ritual condolences, in compliments that sound warm but never burn. The surface is always plausible. The depths are yours alone. There are days when you wish you could feel more. You watch people who seem to overflow, who laugh with abandon, who cry in public, who rage and rejoice without calculation. Their lives look messy, but vivid. You envy them, but you also know what they risk. You remember the times you tried to be fully open, the way people pulled back, changed the subject, shrank from the force of your real, raw emotion. You learned the hard way that not everyone can hold your truth, and not every environment rewards honesty. So, you revert to the protocol. Feel briefly, recover quickly, resume operations. The process becomes almost scientific. In a tough conversation, you allow yourself 30 seconds of real feeling, long enough to register empathy, not so long that it unsettles the balance. You rehearse your tone, monitor your facial muscles, correct yourself if your voice wavers. In conflict, you reveal just enough vulnerability to disarm aggression, then retreat into logic. You become a minimalist, conserving energy for emergencies, saving the full spectrum for a time and place that never seems to arrive. But beneath the surface, the process loops are running, silent, efficient, relentless. Your mind sorts every feeling into categories: permissible, dangerous, unnecessary. Grief is acknowledged, but never indulged. Anger is trimmed down to irritation, then redirected into productivity. Even happiness is suspicious, allowed only in trace amounts, so you don't become too visible, too vulnerable, too at risk of disappointment. You move through the world like a surgeon, gloves on, never letting skin touch skin unless it's absolutely required. Sometimes, in the privacy of your own mind, you wonder what it would feel like to turn off the protocol, to live, even for a day without the filters and constraints, to laugh until your stomach hurts, to cry until you're empty, to admit to someone just how much you ache or hope or fear. But each time you consider it, the process loop warns you, too much emotion is a liability. Too much truth invites trouble. Best to play it safe, best to keep the dosage low. You notice how this protocol shapes your relationships. People describe you as calm, unflappable, dependable. They trust you with their secrets, their messes, their storms, because you never lose control. They see you as solid ground, but they rarely wonder what it costs to be the safe one. In romance, you find partners who are drawn to your steadiness, who trust you to anchor their chaos. But sometimes, late at night, they whisper that they wish they could see more. "What are you feeling?" they ask. You search for words, but the protocol delivers a carefully edited answer, one that comforts but never reveals the true depths. There's a certain pride in your restraint. You know how quickly the world can punish excess. You've watched people lose jobs, lose friends, lose their own sense of self in the undertow of uncontrolled emotion. You tell yourself that minimalism is wisdom. That feeling just enough is not just survival, but strategy. You believe that efficiency is mercy, that by sparing others from the storm inside you, you make their world a little safer. But sometimes you see the cost. A friend in crisis asks you for comfort, and you offer the right words, but feel the distance between you, a sterile gap, a warmth that never quite reaches their core. You attend celebrations and funerals, blending in perfectly, but feeling like an observer in your own life. The world becomes muted, the colors faded. You wonder if you've traded vitality for safety, authenticity for acceptance. Yet, the protocol endures. It becomes part of your identity. You reassure yourself. You are not numb, not dead inside, just efficient. You are the person others lean on, the one who never falls apart, the one who gets things done. If some part of you aches for a fuller existence, for deeper feeling, for the chaos of unfiltered humanity, you remind yourself that those things are luxuries you can't afford. Not yet. Maybe someday the protocol will loosen. Maybe you'll find a place, or a person, or a moment where you can turn off the process loops, drop the filters, and let yourself overflow. Until then, you practice your art. Emotional minimalism. You feel, but only briefly. You show, but only enough. And behind your eyes, the machinery hums, a silent, sterile loop, efficient and cold, keeping you safe from a world that demands just enough humanity to survive and never a drop more. Compassion, fatigue, lockout. There comes a point, sometimes gradual, sometimes sudden, when the well inside you runs dry. You've poured kindness into broken lives, bleeding wounds, never-ending emergencies. You've answered every midnight call, shouldered pain that wasn't yours, patched holes in the lives of strangers and loved ones alike. You never asked why. You just did it. Because that's what you do. Because kindness is your language. Because you believe in holding the line when others run. But then one day, something shifts. You feel it as a tiredness, not just in your body, but deep in your mind, your spirit, your ability to care. It's as if some inner defense mechanism finally snaps into place. The world keeps asking for more, but now your system refuses to process the request. The lockout begins, not with a bang, but with a quiet, implacable numbness. It's not that you don't see the pain around you. It's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you simply cannot do it. Not this time. Not right now. Your brain, your heart, your entire emotional circuitry, everything rations kindness. Everything is in survival mode. This is compassion fatigue lockout. It's not rare. It happens to frontline workers, nurses, social workers, therapists, teachers, caregivers, friends, parents. Anyone who has been asked to care too many times, with too little space to recover. The cost of kindness, when repeated without relief, is a kind of emotional shutdown. The system disables feelings the way a circuit breaker cuts power to a burning wire. Not to be cruel, but to prevent total collapse. You notice it in the smallest interactions. Maybe you read a story about tragedy and your mind barely flinches. Someone confides their heartbreak and you nod, but inside, you feel nothing. A colleague asks for help, and you want to say yes, but the word dies before it reaches your lips. You remember what it was like to be moved, to feel that urgent pulse of empathy, but now it's distant, abstract, like recalling a language you once spoke fluently, but now can barely piece together. You try to fake it at first. You go through the motions. You offer the right words, the gestures, the surface warmth. But inside, there's only static. You worry that people will notice. You worry that you've become heartless. The guilt stings, but even that fades after a while. Eventually, you stop pretending. You ration kindness the way a city rations water during a drought. Only the most urgent cases get anything at all. Maybe you remember the early days, before the lockout. You remember what it was like to be the person everyone came to, the helper, the healer, the rescuer. You'd listen for hours, lose sleep for someone else's crisis, cry for someone else's pain. It felt noble. It felt right. You believed you could keep going forever, but you didn't know what constant exposure would do to your heart. Nobody warned you about the invisible cost, the slow erosion of your own reserves. The science is simple, but merciless. The human brain can only handle so much distress before it begins to defend itself. Chronic stress, endless exposure to trauma, repeated disappointment. These trigger the same protective mechanisms that dull pain after injury. It's a neurological firewall, a way to prevent emotional burnout. You don't choose the lockout. It chooses you. Let's make it concrete. Imagine a nurse in an overflowing ER. On her first week, every loss stabs her. Every patient's suffering is a personal wound. She goes home and cries. She promises herself she'll never harden, never stop caring. But weeks turn to months, months to years. The stories blur together. The faces become interchangeable. One day, she learns a patient she cared for has died, and she feels nothing. The grief is gone. She's still professional, still skilled, but something vital has shut down. She rations kindness for the few she can still reach. Everyone else gets efficiency, not empathy. Or imagine the friend who always answers the phone no matter the hour. For years, she's the emotional anchor in her group, the one who never needs, the one who always gives. But after years of being everyone's support system, she wakes up and realizes she's empty. The calls keep coming, but she stops answering. Not out of malice, but because her soul is exhausted. She waits for the risk of burnout to drop, but it never quite does. So, she disappears. Kindness is now a luxury she cannot afford. Compassion fatigue lockout isn't laziness. It's not selfishness. It's the inevitable endpoint of a system that never rests. The only way to survive is to ration the very thing that once defined you. You become a triage nurse for your own empathy, handing out small rations to those in greatest need and leaving the rest to fend for themselves. You might try to fix it. You might take time off, meditate, seek therapy. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it only highlights how deep the depletion runs. You begin to question everything. Was it worth it? Did I help anyone, or did I just drain myself dry for a world that only wants more? You notice how society both praises and exploits the endlessly kind. People celebrate your selflessness right up until the moment you break. Then they call you cold or distant or unreliable. Nobody sees the mountain of invisible pain you've carried. Nobody honors the toll. They just want you to reboot and care again. Sometimes there's anger underneath the numbness, anger at a world that never gives back, anger at people who take and never notice when you're running on empty, anger at yourself for not having better boundaries, for not knowing when to stop, for believing you could do it all. But even anger requires energy, and you're past that now. You enter a period of emotional hibernation. You do the bare minimum. You protect what's left of yourself, because you know that if you give any more, there will be nothing left to give, even to yourself. And yet, the longing remains. The longing to care, to feel, to connect. The memory of what it was like to weep for someone else, to be moved by another's pain, to believe in kindness as a force that could change things. You want it back. You want to reset the system, but you don't know how. Maybe, slowly, the risk of burnout drops. Maybe, as time passes, you start to feel flickers of empathy return. A story moves you, a friend's struggle touches you, a stranger's kindness restores a little faith. You realize that compassion isn't infinite. It's a resource to be managed, not squandered. You learn to say no, to protect your reserves, to set boundaries. You give less, but you give better. Or maybe the lockout never fully lifts. Maybe you accept that there's only so much you can do, and that's enough. You learn that survival isn't selfish, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to care beyond your limits, that self-preservation is the foundation of every kindness that actually matters. There's a strange grace in compassion fatigue lockout. It forces you to confront the truth. You are human. You cannot save everyone. You cannot even save yourself if you keep giving without pause. The lockout is your body's way of keeping you alive long enough to care again someday. So, if you find yourself here, numb, exhausted, rationing kindness, know this. You are not broken. You are not cold. You are not failing anyone. You are protecting the most precious thing you have, your ability to care at all. The system disables emotional responses, not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for far too long. And maybe, with time, with rest, with honesty, you'll find your way back to the well. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Compassion, even rationed, is still compassion, and you deserve as much of it as anyone you've ever helped. Intimacy, prediction, shutdown. Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of something new, a conversation that feels just a little too electric, a hand that lingers in yours, a look that lasts longer than it should. You sense it. The first flicker of closeness, that precarious possibility where love, trust, or even simple affection might take root. But even as your heart starts to move, your mind is racing ahead. You map out the whole story before it ever begins. You predict the high points, the laughter, the confessions at midnight, the way someone might finally understand you. And then, just as clearly, you predict the crash, the moment it fades, the argument that leaves scars, the betrayal, the slow distance growing in the silence. You see the entire curve of intimacy, start, rise, peak, fall, long before the story's even written. And so, before anything can take hold, you shut the system down, you back away. You ghost, you deflect, you laugh it off, or you bury yourself in work. You become the master of endings that never begin. That's the intimacy prediction shutdown. It doesn't always feel like fear. On the surface, it looks like logic, self-preservation, maturity. Why let yourself get hurt when you can see the patterns from miles away? Why not avoid the pain you already know is waiting for you at the end of every closeness? You convince yourself you're just being realistic, just protecting yourself, just refusing to waste time on another story destined for heartbreak. But beneath all that calculation is a softer truth. You are tired of loss. You are tired of opening up, only to be left holding the ruins of what could have been. Maybe it started after a heartbreak that gutted you, one you didn't see coming, or one you did but couldn't stop. Maybe it began with a betrayal from someone you trusted, a friend or lover or even family, someone who made you believe in permanence before they disappeared. Maybe you just saw too many patterns, too many cycles in your own life and in the lives of people around you. Love blooms, love burns, love ends. Vulnerability is always met with risk. You can almost chart it on a graph. Openness leads to hope. Hope leads to connection. Connection leads to risk, and risk, inevitably, leads to pain. You get so good at reading the warning signs that you don't even need them anymore. The story writes itself in your head before anyone else has a chance to prove you wrong. You watch the way someone looks at you, and you know, this will end in silence. You hear the excitement in your own voice, and you know, this will fade. You feel the old warmth returning, and you know, this will burn you again. So you shut down. You answer messages late or not at all. You keep your answers short, never ask the questions you really want to ask. You keep conversations at arm's length. You turn every intimate moment into a joke, every confession into a riddle, every chance at real closeness into something safer, something you can control. The world sees you as independent, unbothered, maybe even enviable. But you know the truth. You are living behind walls you built to survive. There are people who try to break through. Sometimes they get close. Sometimes you even let yourself believe it could be different. But just as intimacy starts to feel real, you find the flaw, the reason to run, the excuse to turn away. Maybe they remind you of someone who hurt you. Maybe you convince yourself that they'll never really understand you. Maybe you start a fight, or pull away, or disappear for days. You sabotage the possibility before it has a chance to disappoint you. This isn't just about romance. It's about friends you never let in past the surface, family you keep at a distance, even dreams you shut down before you ever chase them. Because chasing means risking failure. You become a predictor of endings, a protector of your own solitude. You think you are keeping yourself safe, but you are also keeping yourself alone. The world is full of people just like you. People who see the patterns, who know the script, who believe it's better to stay unhurt than to try again. You recognize each other in the wild. The flinch when someone gets too close, the practiced smile, the way your laughter never quite reaches your eyes. You find comfort in the safety, but also a quiet ache, a longing for something you no longer trust yourself to want. It's easy to believe this is strength. It's easy to tell yourself that only fools keep trying, that wisdom means seeing the end from the beginning. But the price of this wisdom is high. Every shutdown becomes another missed moment, another connection that dies on the vine. The stories you never let yourself live become ghosts that haunt you. You become expert at surviving heartbreak by never letting your heart break at all. But in the process, you stop letting it fully live. Psychologists call this anticipatory defense, a way the brain tries to avoid pain by predicting and preventing it. But the truth is, predicting the curve doesn't change the fact that you are still human, still wired for connection. The loneliness doesn't disappear. It just becomes less visible, buried under layers of logic and retreat. Sometimes, the longing gets so loud you can't ignore it. You find yourself awake at 2 a.m., scrolling through memories, imagining conversations that never happened, wondering what would have been if you had just let the story unfold. There's a paradox here. The more you try to avoid pain, the more you end up feeling it. Slowly, quietly, endlessly. The walls don't keep heartbreak out. They keep you trapped inside with it. The prediction becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. Nothing lasts because you never let anything begin. But what if you let yourself risk it? Just once. What if you allowed the pattern to break? What if you believed, even for a moment, that not every curve has to end in disaster? It won't be easy. You will feel exposed. You will feel afraid. You will want to run. But you will also feel something else. The shock of being alive, the thrill of uncertainty, the possibility that this time, the story could be different. Not every shutdown has to be permanent. Sometimes you can let yourself glitch, let yourself care, let yourself hope even when you know the odds. Sometimes you can let the system reboot, Risk the messiness of feeling, the terror of not knowing what comes next. Maybe it will end. Maybe it will hurt. But maybe, just maybe, it will give you something worth all the pain you've tried so hard to avoid. In the end, life isn't about perfect predictions. It's about imperfect, beautiful risk, the leap into the unknown, the choice to love in spite of the curve you see coming. You don't have to live with the system in shutdown forever. You can let yourself begin, even if you don't know where it will end. And sometimes, that's how the best stories are written. Void logic implementation. There comes a moment, sometimes after years of searching, when you realize there is no answer coming. You sit in the dark, the questions echoing in your skull. Why did it happen? What could you have done differently? Why did they leave? Why did the world break this way? Why do you feel like a guest in your own story? The world is obsessed with closure, with the right explanation, with the comfort of a narrative that makes sense of suffering. But you reach a point where you stop clawing at the wall for hidden doors. You stop dissecting every memory for a clue you might have missed. You realize there is only void, a blank where the answer should be. And for the first time, you accept it. You let the void itself be the answer. You watch other people keep searching. They dig through the old texts, therapy notes, recordings of conversations, signs and omens and dreams. They hunt for meaning like it's oxygen. They tell themselves that if they just look long enough, hard enough, the pattern will emerge. But you know better. You've burned through the cycles, bargaining, analyzing, blaming, hoping. You've watched every theory collapse, every aha moment dissolve into fog. You recognize the shape of futility. Some nights, it's a weight on your chest, an emptiness that aches. But you also feel something sharper, quieter, more honest than hope. Clarity. Clarity isn't comfort. You don't sit with the void because it soothes you. Sometimes, it feels like acid, burning away the easy illusions, the soft half-truths that once let you sleep. But you'd rather have that raw honesty than the pain of endless, fruitless searching. You start to realize that not every wound can be healed. Not every story gets a resolution. Not every why has a because. Some doors don't open because there is nothing on the other side. You think back to the moments you wasted chasing closure. You replayed the breakup, the betrayal, the moment the job fell through, the night you lost someone you loved. You combed through the evidence, retraced your steps, made yourself sick with what-ifs. All of it felt urgent. If you could just understand, the pain would lose its teeth. But understanding never came. The pain lingered anyway. In that endless loop, you learned something most people never do. The void isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a fact to accept. People say it's nihilism, or pessimism, or defeat. But you know it's just another kind of logic, the logic of the void. You stop expecting closure from the universe. You stop expecting the universe to be a story written for your benefit. When someone leaves without explanation, you don't fill in the gaps with self-blame or fantasy. You don't assign yourself the role of the villain, the fool, or the chosen one who just didn't try hard enough. You let the gap remain empty. You say, there is no answer, and that is the answer. The freedom is strange at first. You don't fill the silence with noise. You don't scramble to invent meaning where none exists. You don't need the past to add up, the future to promise redemption. When you stare into the void, it stares back, and you don't flinch. The emptiness becomes familiar, almost companionable. You don't fear it anymore. You know that some questions are just questions, not riddles with hidden keys. Some mysteries exist only to remain unsolved. Your friends don't always understand. They urge you to keep searching, to find closure, to forgive or forget or reframe until it hurts less. You nod, but inside, you know they're only postponing the moment when the search burns itself out. You watch them chase old lovers, call estranged parents, dig up the roots of ancient wounds. You see how the need for an answer becomes its own cage. You wonder if they envy your calm, or if they see it as resignation. You know better. It's neither. It's just clarity, distilled and absolute. This doesn't mean you're above feeling. You still hurt. The loss is real. The questions still ache. But you don't let them rule you. You let the ache exist, unsoftened by fairy tales. You make peace with the idea that the universe owes you nothing, not even a story that makes sense. You build your days around what you know, not what you wish were true. And the more you live with the void, the less it frightens you. You see the logic of it everywhere. In nature, how some creatures vanish, some storms have no pattern, some seasons never bring the rains. In history, how some lives are cut short, some loves never return, some dreams fade before they're ever spoken aloud. The world is a tapestry with holes woven right into it, and for the first time, you're not trying to patch them over. You admire the pattern for what it is, incomplete, imperfect, but real. In time, you become grateful for this ability. You notice how much energy you save by not fighting the void. While others exhaust themselves with questions that don't have answers, you focus on what can be known, what can be changed, what is right in front of you. You become sharper, less likely to be manipulated by your own longing for meaning. The void becomes your boundary, your reset button. When something doesn't add up, you don't force it. You accept that it never will. You move on, lighter, less entangled. Sometimes, in rare moments, the universe offers an answer after all, months or years after you stop searching. The closure arrives not as comfort, but as a footnote. You take it, you nod, but you don't need it anymore. You learn to live without it. You learn that comfort is optional, but clarity, however empty, however cold, is enough. You let yourself rest in the unknowing. So the next time you're tempted to keep searching for an answer that refuses to appear, pause. Breathe. Let the question echo. Let the void remain. Trust that the absence of an answer is not a failure, but a fact. Trust that you can live with the emptiness, and that somehow, that is its own kind of wholeness. You don't need the universe to resolve for you. You only need to see what is and what isn't, and let that be enough. Sacrificial emotion. Bypass. You sit in a room staring at the board, the spreadsheet, the roster, the seating chart, or maybe just the faces around the dinner table. The decision that needs to be made is ugly, inevitable, and you know it. Someone will have to suffer. Maybe not everyone, but someone. There's no path forward where everybody walks away unscathed. You weigh the options, feel the familiar tightening in your chest, and then, almost reflexively, you engage the sacrificial emotion bypass. You start to calculate who must be hurt. You don't do it because you want to. You do it because it's the only way anything gets done. Pain is no longer just a feeling. It's a variable in an equation. Sacrifice becomes a resource to be deployed, not a tragedy to be mourned. You could call this ruthlessness, or you could call it realism. Either way, you're not here to be liked. You're here to make sure the machine keeps moving, that the system survives, even if it means someone gets cut, left out, or trampled underfoot. Think of the doctor in an overwhelmed emergency room, forced to triage patients after a disaster. There's one ventilator left. 3 people needed. In an instant, empathy must be silenced, or at least muted. Feel too much, and you're paralyzed. Feel too little, and you're a monster. The solution is sacrificial emotion bypass, a temporary override, a mode where you assign value, make the cut, and accept the pain you must cause. Not because you want to, because you have to. Or picture the CEO of a struggling company, payroll looming, and numbers deep in the red. Layoffs are not a theoretical possibility. They are survival. The old you might have lost sleep, wept, agonized over every name on the list. But now, you move the names like chess pieces, coldly assessing impact, ripple effects, efficiency. You brace for the pain, assign it where it's least destructive, and press send. You mourn, perhaps, but only later, and only in private. You can't afford empathy at scale, not when the survival of hundreds or thousands is at stake. This is sacrificial emotion bypass, a logic circuit designed for moments when empathy becomes a bottleneck, a liability, a drag on the execution of necessary, sometimes brutal, actions. On the battlefield, in government, in business, in medicine, even in families facing impossible choices, the calculus is always the same. Who can be spared? Who must be sacrificed for the greater good? What pain is strategic? And what pain is avoidable? It's utilitarianism in real time, stripped of sentiment, tuned for maximum throughput and minimum disruption. At first, it feels unnatural. Maybe you flinch the first time you have to hurt someone, even if it's for the right reasons. You remember their face, their story, their small quirks. You think about the lives you're disrupting, the dreams you're shattering, the faith you're betraying. But if you stay in that place, you'll break. the system will break. So you develop the bypass. You train yourself to focus on outcomes, not outcries. You let empathy narrow to a pinprick, reserved only for the group as a whole, never the individuals you must sacrifice along the way. Over time, you become more efficient. The calculations are faster, cleaner. The pain of others is still real, but it's contained, managed, abstracted. You don't ignore it, but you don't let it steer the ship. When the moment comes, you accept it. You take ownership of the pain you've caused, not as a villain, but as a steward. You carry the moral weight in silence because someone has to. There's no time for regret, no room for hesitation. Strategic pain is necessary pain. Sacrifice is not cruelty, it's math. And yet, the ghosts linger. You see the faces in your dreams, sometimes in quiet moments when the world goes dark and there's nothing left but memory. You wonder what became of those you cut loose, those whose pain was the price of progress. You wonder if, in sparing the many, you became blind to the humanity of the few. You rationalize, telling yourself that empathy is inefficient at scale, that not everyone can be saved, that someone has to make the hard choices. And maybe you're right. The world needs people who can walk the line, who can bear the cost without flinching. But what happens if the bypass gets stuck? If the circuit stays closed too long and you lose the ability to feel altogether? You start to drift, disconnected, more machine than human. The calculations get easier, but the world loses its color. You become effective, but not alive. The danger of sacrificial emotion bypass isn't that it makes you cruel, it's that it makes you empty. The solution isn't to abandon the bypass, but to respect its limits. Use it when you must, when lives or livelihoods depend on clear, unsentimental action. But don't let it become your default state. Make time to grieve the sacrifices, to honor the pain, to remember the names and faces of those you hurt. Let yourself feel, even if only in the aftermath. Balance the logic with conscience, strategy with soul. There's a strange nobility in bearing the burden of necessary pain. Few will thank you. Many will blame you. The weight is yours alone, but you carry it so others don't have to. That is the price of leadership, of responsibility, of living in a world that can't be made fair. Pain is part of the equation, and someone must be the one who accepts it, calmly, strategically, without illusion. In the end, the sacrificial emotion bypass is a tool. It's a shield against paralysis and a weapon against chaos, but it is not, and never should be, the sum of who you are. You are not just the sum of your calculations. You are the one who dares to face the ugly truth, to walk the razor's edge between empathy and execution, to do what others cannot. You accept that pain is strategic, that sacrifice is logical, that empathy has limits. But you also remember, in quiet moments, why the world still needs people who feel. Because without that, there is no one left to grieve, to hope, to love, or to heal. You become the one who carries the scars, the one who keeps the system moving, the one who absorbs the pain so others can thrive. Not because you want to hurt, but because you know someone must. And you hope, in the end, that this burden means something. That somewhere, the pain you accepted buys a little more time, a little more safety, a little more hope for those you chose to protect. And that is enough. Neural stability, prioritization. There's a principle buried deep in your mental circuitry, rarely named, but always there, quietly shaping your reality. Neural stability, prioritization. You may not call it that, but you live it every day, often without realizing. It's the unspoken rule that tells you, above all, preserve the order inside your mind. Protect cognitive consistency at any cost. Even if it means letting go of emotional honesty. Even if it means bending reality itself just to keep the inner static at bay. Think about the last time you faced an uncomfortable truth. Some jarring fact that threatened to fracture your sense of self, or the way you see the world. Maybe it was a betrayal you tried not to see, a mistake you tried not to own, or a realization about yourself that threatened to uproot years of certainty. Your heart wanted to feel it, wanted to rage, to grieve, to let the truth in no matter the cost. But your mind slammed the doors, closed the windows, and did whatever it took to maintain equilibrium. If the truth was too painful, your mind simply rewrote the story. If reality was inconvenient, you found a way to reinterpret, rationalize, or outright ignore it. Cognitive consistency, the peace of internal order, became more valuable than the pain of honesty. This is not a conscious choice most of the time. It's instinct, hardwired into your neural network like a failsafe. The mind fears chaos above all. Dissonance, those sharp, buzzing moments when your beliefs and your feelings collide, creates an unbearable noise. So you prioritize neural stability. You cling to the thoughts that soothe, the explanations that quiet the storm. You let yourself believe what you need to believe, even if the evidence shouts otherwise. The narrative bends, the facts blur, but the internal system stays intact. You see this everywhere, if you know where to look. The person who stays in a broken relationship because the alternative is too destabilizing. The loyal employee who ignores obvious corruption because acknowledging it would shatter their sense of belonging. The friend who insists, despite all proof, that they were right, because to admit otherwise would crack the foundation of their identity. These aren't just stubborn people. They're survivors of their own internal wars, desperate to keep the noise down, to keep the machine running. Maybe you do this too. You tell yourself that your choices were justified, that the people you love are who you need them to be, that your pain is less than it feels. You shape your world not around what is true, but around what you can tolerate. Sometimes you catch yourself in the act, a flash of self-awareness in the mirror, and wonder, am I lying to myself? Am I curating my own reality just to stay sane? And the answer, if you're honest, is yes. But so is everyone else. Neural stability is the default setting for the human mind. The brain is not a cold instrument of truth. It is a machine built for survival, for predictability, for order. It prefers a wrong but stable narrative to a chaotic but accurate one. It values silence over static. It will twist and warp reality just a little to keep the engine from seizing up. There's an evolutionary logic to this. In ancient times, a mind divided against itself was a liability. The tribe needed you to act, not to hesitate. If your beliefs and your feelings pulled you in different directions, you risked paralysis at the worst possible time. So, your mind learned to pick a lane and stick with it, even if it meant denying parts of the world, or of yourself, that didn't fit. Better to be wrong and functional than right and lost. You see this strategy in how people process grief, loss, or trauma. The story bends to protect the psyche. The abandoned child convinces themselves it wasn't really abandonment, just circumstance. The heartbroken lover finds reasons to justify the ending, rather than face the full depth of pain. Even on a collective scale, whole cultures invent myths and shared illusions to keep the peace, to explain away horrors that would otherwise shatter the social order. The truth becomes malleable, secondary to the calm it brings. Sometimes, this adaptation is merciful. It lets you move forward when the truth would crush you. It lets you maintain relationships, continue working, keep faith in something, anything, when the alternative is breakdown. But there is a cost. The longer you bend reality for stability, the further you drift from authenticity. The walls go up, the static fades, but so does the chance for real change, real connection. You become an actor in a play you wrote just to keep yourself safe. You live inside a curated version of reality, clean and orderly, but just a little too quiet. This is the paradox at the heart of neural stability prioritization. Peace of mind is precious, but it is purchased with truth. Sometimes you have to choose, risk chaos for honesty, or settle for the comfort of consistency. Most days, you settle. You tell yourself that you're fine, that nothing's wrong, that it all makes sense. You keep your thoughts aligned, your feelings trimmed, your reality in neat rows. The mind stays quiet. The machine hums. And the rest, the questions, the doubts, the jagged edges of truth, are put in storage, filed away for some distant reckoning. Yet, even as you maintain this order, some part of you remembers the noise. The moments when reality broke through, when the system glitched and you saw the world as it really was. Messy, complicated, unresolved. Those moments hurt, but they also felt alive. You wonder sometimes if the price of neural stability is too high, if the silence you cherish is just another form of exile, another way to hide from yourself. But for now, you choose the quiet. You tune your mind to the frequency of what you can handle. You bend, reshape, and filter reality to fit the model that keeps you functioning. And maybe that's not cowardice. Maybe it's survival. Maybe, in a world built on uncertainty, the mind's deepest loyalty is not to truth, but to peace. You keep the system stable, even if it means believing a story that never quite fits the facts. Because as long as the mind stays quiet, you get to keep moving forward, one stable, silent step at a time. Total emotional nullification. You walk into the room, and it's like stepping into a vacuum. The air isn't empty, but your presence is. You take in the faces, the sounds, the flickers of laughter or pain, each detail registering as data, never as experience. There's no pulse of excitement, no ache of empathy, no spark of irritation or hope. It isn't that you don't understand emotion, you do. You see it like a scientist behind glass, cataloging every microexpression, every sigh, every tremor in the voice. But you feel nothing. You say nothing that isn't necessary. You leave nothing behind. The only trace of you is the faint displacement of air. And you don't do it because you're broken or cruel or lost. You do it because the cost of feeling is simply too high, and somewhere along the line, you made the silent calculation. Emotion is a debt you can't afford. It wasn't always like this. Maybe once you were sensitive to every mood. You carried other people's pain like it was your own. You could walk into a room and feel the temperature of the conversation, the current of hope or sadness or possibility humming beneath the surface. You didn't just witness life. You absorbed it. Sometimes it was beautiful. Sometimes it nearly destroyed you. Every joy was a door, every wound a storm. And eventually the storms grew too frequent, too violent, too costly. You began to see the pattern. Feelings meant exposure. Caring meant vulnerability. Every new connection was a risk. One more chance to be disappointed, betrayed, overwhelmed, or simply exhausted. You learned to economize your emotions, to parse every encounter for its cost. The emotional world became a marketplace where every feeling was weighed against what it would take from you in return. It wasn't cynicism. It was survival. When the price of feeling is always paid in your own peace, you begin to wonder, what would it mean to stop paying altogether? At first, it's subtle. A hesitation before you offer comfort, a pause before you let yourself laugh, a quiet withdrawal when someone else's sorrow tries to climb into your bones. You still go through the motions. You know what people want. You know what kindness looks like, what empathy sounds like, what love is supposed to feel like. But inside, you pull the plug. The world becomes grayscale. Every encounter is muted, every sensation blunted. You're still there, but you're only visiting. With time, nullification becomes a routine. You enter spaces, homes, offices, classrooms, parties, and slip through them like a ghost. You observe, interact, perform, and then depart, leaving nothing behind for anyone to hold on to. You become a master of neutrality, a practitioner of emotional minimalism. You don't cause harm, but you don't invite connection. You are present, but never involved. People talk around you, through you, at you, but rarely to you in any way that matters. Sometimes, people notice. You're so calm, they say. Nothing rattles you. Some admire it, some resent it, some sense the emptiness, but don't have the language to name it. You nod, smile, play your role. You become a safe space for others to unload their chaos, because they know nothing will stick to you. You will never become a burden, because you have no burdens left to share. You are a vessel with the lid screwed on tight. But the truth is more complicated. You aren't emotionless because you don't care. You're emotionless because you once cared too much. Every disaster, every heartbreak, every disappointment taught you that feeling is a gamble, and the house always wins. So you trained yourself not to bet. You build routines, armor, distance. You become a master of substitution, replacing vulnerability with observation, intimacy with logic, presence with function. You notice the trade-offs in daily life. Someone shares good news, and you nod politely, your heart unmoved. Someone confides pain, and you offer solutions, not solace. You watch a tearful movie scene and think about the acting, the script, the lighting, anything except what the moment is supposed to stir in you. At first, you grieve the absence. You miss being able to care. You miss the rush, the ache, the wild aliveness of feeling. But over time, you come to value the silence. No one can reach you where you've gone. You become efficient, unflappable. In a crisis, you are the first responder. Not because you're heroic, but because you can act without being slowed down by feeling. You solve problems quickly. You don't get distracted by guilt, hope, regret. You are a machine running clean code. People depend on you. They trust you to make decisions when everyone else is lost in fear or grief. You become indispensable, but also invisible. Your reliability is legendary. Your humanity is forgotten. Sometimes, when you're alone, you wonder what you've lost. You remember flashes of connection, moments when you were open and alive and utterly unguarded. But the pain was always close behind. Nullification promised safety, and it delivered. But it also delivered emptiness, a life lived in parentheses, a story told in the passive voice. You ask yourself, what is the price of never paying the price? What does it mean to live a life without leaving any emotional fingerprints? Occasionally, something breaks through. A song you once loved, a memory you can't suppress, a sudden wave of longing. For a second, you feel the old ache, the heat rising in your chest, the warning that says, here comes the cost. Instinctively, you shut it down. You close the window, change the subject, busy yourself with details. The algorithm protects you, but the protection feels like hunger. Maybe you notice others who are still awake to their feelings. They laugh too loud, cry too easily, love without safety nets. Sometimes you envy them. Sometimes you judge them. But you know that you were one of them once. The difference is that you learned, perhaps too well, how to survive in a world where every feeling is taxed, and the bill is always due. You see the paradox everywhere. Total emotional nullification is both a wound and a weapon. It keeps you upright, but it keeps you alone. It lets you function, but it robs you of meaning. You become the person who always knows what to do, but never remembers why it matters. You are a steady hand in a storm, but you are never moved by the rain. Is it permanent? Maybe, maybe not. Some people never find their way back. Others wake up one day and realize they're starving for connection, for risk, for the dizzying mess of human feeling. They learn to crack open the armor, one small moment at a time. It's never easy. The cost of re-entry is always high. It means being willing to lose again, to hurt again, to let the world touch you in ways you cannot control. But until then, you walk into rooms, feel nothing, say nothing, leave nothing behind. Not because you're broken, but because you understand the math of pain. Not because you want to be numb, but because numbness feels safer than being burned alive by your own tenderness. You live like a shadow, functional, silent, impervious to storms. And somewhere, in the background, you wonder what it would take to let the world in again. What it would mean to risk feeling, even when you know the cost. You leave, and the world keeps spinning. No one remembers what you said. No one remembers how you made them feel, because you made sure not to make them feel anything at all. You walk away, and the silence you leave behind is not an accident. It's the price you pay for never paying the price of being alive. But sometimes, just sometimes, you stand at the edge of that silence and ask yourself, is this all there is? Is the absence of pain worth the absence of everything else? You have no answer, not yet. But somewhere inside, the question is still alive, waiting for the day you decide the cost of feeling is finally worth paying again.